Fog drifts over a harbour too large to name. The water holds its breath beneath lanterns that tremble on the rigging of ships. Canton, Calcutta, Bombay. The lines blur in the dark. In that hour before dawn, when the tide turns but the world has not yet noticed, the first crates shift from deck to dinghy. Their labels speak in riddles: textiles, saltpeter, dried goods, but the men moving them know their true cargo. Inside, wrapped in paper, bound with straw, lies the powder that will tilt economies, topple dynasties, and lace itself into the bloodstream of empires. The narrator's voice moves like the tide measured. Low, hypnotic. Asterisk. This is not a story about vice. Asterisk. It begins. Asterisk. It is a story about arithmetic. Asterisk. Opium, it tells us, was less a drug than a system, a circuit of coin and obligation, a silent machinery that turned greed into policy. The crates rocking gently in the harbour are only the surface. Beneath them, invisible but precise, run the currents of exchange. Tea for silver, silver for opium, opium for empire. A loop so efficient, so profitable, that it reshaped not only trade routes but moral boundaries. The night expands, showing more of its players. British company clerks hunched over ledgers that smell of ink and humidity, their quills scratching columns that reach across oceans. Parsi brokers in Bombay, whose fortunes rose like the tide with each chest's arrival. American captains from Salem and Boston, sailing under neutral flags to skirt the company's monopoly. Cantonese Hong merchants, caught between imperial decree and market demand, calculating risk as if it were prayer. Chinese peasants, faces turned toward fields that no longer fed them, their taxes rising as their silver drained eastward. And in distant offices, London financiers watching ships like pawns, measuring human lives in interest rates and seasonal returns. The camera moves slowly across the decks, where sailors squat over pipes in the dark. Smoke curls upward, soft as confession. The narrator explains that in the 18th and 19th centuries, China's tea had become Europe's addiction. The British, bound by taste and trade, could not wean themselves from its steady comfort. But the exchange was ruinous. Silver flowed east to pay for tea, emptying European treasuries into Chinese vaults. So the solution emerged not in parliament or palace, but in counting rooms, men with ink-stained fingers devising ways to reverse the current without breaking the illusion of balance. Their answer was opium. Not introduced, as legend claims, by pirates or smugglers, but by economists in uniform. India grew it under British license. Chinese ports forbade it under imperial law. That tension, the world's largest supply, meeting its strictest prohibition, created the perfect profit. The drug's journey from poppy field to porcelain teacup was not one of chaos, but of choreography. It began with farmers in Bihar, pressed by company agents to plant poppy instead of rice. It ended with silver dollars landing in Bombay banks, where they were recorded not as moral compromise but as trade correction. Asterisk accountancy's shadow, asterisk the narrator calls it. In this realm, morality and commerce seldom met. The clerks who logged the shipments would never see a pipe. The sailors who carried them would never taste tea. Yet both laboured under the same arithmetic. For every ounce of smoke in Canton, a coin returned to London. Empires are not built on conquest alone, they are balanced on credit. Long before cannon fire shattered forts or treaties drew lines, the ledgers had already decided who would win. The music fades to the sound of paper turning, slow and deliberate. A hand, anonymous, ringless, methodical, opens a bound ledger. Inside, columns of profit gleam like quiet triumphs. The narrator's voice lowers to a whisper that feels like a question. Asterisk. When the numbers grew so large they could buy a fleet, what empire could afford to say no? Asterisk. Lantern light flickers over the ink, and the screen begins to brighten with the first grey hint of dawn. The harbour wakes men shouting, ropes straining, sails unfurling. The story moves from secrecy to calculation, from night to day. The calm voice concludes. Asterisk. To understand the machinery of empire, we must follow the flow tea, silver, and shortage the arithmetic that made opium inevitable. Asterisk. The image fades to sunlight striking the river's surface, and the next question begins to form. How could something so forbidden become essential? Steam curls above a porcelain cup, delicate as breath. A spoon clinks once, breaking the surface of amber liquid, and the film slows to a stillness that feels ceremonial. The camera pulls back to reveal a London drawing room. Lace curtains, polished silver, polite conversation. The scene is elegant, quiet, and utterly deceptive. Because within that cup lies a geography. Every sip connects to soil half a world away. Every swallow deepens a debt. The narrator begins, voice smooth as poured tea. Asterisk. In the 18th century, Britain's favourite comfort had become its most dangerous habit. Asterisk. The nation's rising devotion to tea, imported through the Canton system in southern China, required one thing that Britain could not easily produce: silver. Not paper promises, not goods, but coin. Spanish dollars and Indian rupees filled the holds of ships bound for Canton, where the Qing court permitted trade only through licensed merchants, paid in bullion. Each chest of tea that returned to London drained the treasury further, until even the Bank of England's vaults began to echo. The narrator lingers on that echo, a hollow sound that reached from counting houses to Parliament. Asterisk, tea made mornings bearable. Asterisk, it continues. Asterisk, but silver made it possible. Asterisk, the East India Company, guardian of empire and gambler of economies, found itself in a paradox. It ruled vast lands rich in produce, but poor in hard currency. The empire's wealth existed on ledgers, not in metal. Factories, soldiers, and investors all depended on a steady flow of silver, yet every shipment of tea widened the gap. So the company's accountants did what strategists could not. They searched for a countercurrent. They needed a product that China would buy willingly, one that could reverse the drain of bullion without provoking open war or open scandal. That solution was found in a flower. The film cuts to Bengal. Early morning haze over a field of poppies, their pods scored with shallow cuts. From each incision, a bead of resin bleeds slowly into the air. The narrator's tone remains calm, but the rhythm sharpens. Asterisk. This was not a vice. Asterisk, it explains. Asterisk. It was balance. Asterisk, opium, grown under company monopoly, taxed and weighed with bureaucratic precision, became the plug in the empire's leaking treasury. Its cultivation was mandatory for many farmers' contracts written in English, enforced by local intermediaries. What began as agriculture became arithmetic. The story narrows to a single coin. Minted in Spanish America, it travels west with merchants, across the Pacific to Canton. There it is exchanged for tea, disappears into a chest, and sails to London. Months later, that same silver coin or its twin reappears at an opium auction in Calcutta, handed from company agent to Parsi broker. The broker uses it to buy chests bound for China, smuggled through the Pearl River Delta under cover of night. When those chests sell to Chinese intermediaries, the silver returns, now laundered by commerce and necessity. The coin completes its circle, from the Americas to Asia to the heart of Britain's empire, carrying both profit and paradox. The narrator calls it a perfect loop, disguised as trade. No treaty declared it, no parliament voted for it. It existed in the spaces between laws, maintained by clerks who understood that silence was safer than confession. In London, the company's directors expressed ignorance. In India, the officials called it expedience. In Canton, both sides looked away. Illegality, the voice notes, was not prohibition, it was performance. The bureaucracy knew exactly where the tide was going. They had simply learned to surf it while pretending to stand still. The camera dissolves between scenes. A quill scratching in a Calcutta office, an abacus clicking in Canton, a tea caddy opening in London. 3 rooms, 1 transaction. Each believes itself innocent because the connection is invisible. But the loop binds them. Tea demands silver, silver buys opium, opium returns silver. Vice becomes policy, not through edict, but through the quiet consent of markets. The narrator poses the hook in a whisper that feels like accusation. Asterisk. What if the most polite habit in Europe, afternoon tea, was balanced by the most silenced habit in Asia? Asterisk. The cup trembles on its saucer as if it understands. The camera pans back to the poppy fields, where the first harvesters begin their day. Ink and resin, coin and comfort, the circuit complete, the balance restored. Having traced the flow of silver and smoke, the voice softens once more. Asterisk. To follow this story further, asterisk, it says, asterisk, we must leave the counting rooms and walk into the fields, to see who grew the resin, who signed the contracts, and how coercion learned to smile. Asterisk. Morning mist spreads like gauze over the plains of Bengal. The soil here is soft, fertile, easily persuaded. Long before anyone spoke of empire, it yielded rice and jute, lentils and cane. Now it grows something else, something paler, more fragile, and far more valuable. The narrator's tone remains slow, deliberate. Asterisk. Dynasties rise on revenue. Asterisk. It begins. Asterisk. And revenue rests on land. Land's fate, therefore, follows seeds. Asterisk. In the 1,830 seconds, those seeds were white poppy, planted under contracts that turned farmers into accountants of pain. Opium began as a policy column, a projection on parchment drawn thousands of miles away. But policy dissolves quickly in the humidity of Bengal. Here, the neat numbers of London and Calcutta hardened into routine. Sow, lance, scrape, sell. Peasant calendars, once ruled by monsoon and harvest, now mark time by incision. Each field was a ledger. Each cut into a poppy pod was both entry and signature. The narrator's voice never sharpens, it doesn't need to. The contrast between arithmetic and agony is enough. The moral tension unfolds quietly. Individual suffering underwriting imperial solvency. The empire's solvency, after all, rested on land revenue, and land revenue on these blooms. A farmer who refused a contract risked forfeiting his field, his grain, his family's share in the next planting season. The company's agents arrived with ledgers and ceremony, offering choice written on fine paper. The first reveal lands like a sigh choice, in this context, was often debt with ornamentation. Ink replaced coercion, signatures replaced chains. Farmers signed to keep what was already theirs, binding themselves to plant what others would profit from. A cutaway reveals the process. The pod, green and swollen, nicked just enough to weep. The resin gathers overnight, darkens, then dries to a gum that smells faintly sweet. A day's harvest fits into a child's palm, yet its value can buy or ruin a household. The narrator explains that the company weighed each scrap with scientific calm, grading purity like coin. The monopoly's precision masked its violence. Pain was priced, standardized, and taxed until it appeared rational. A single ledger page fills the frame, inked with numbers that seem to hum. Each figure corresponds to lives compressed into decimals. Opium was not an indulgence here. It was revenue, predictable as rainfall. The voice grows quieter still. Asterisk. This is how conquest matures when it no longer marches, only measures. Asterisk. Soldiers gave way to surveyors. The sword evolved into the scale. By transforming compulsion into contract, empire achieved its most efficient form of control, one that required no whip, only paperwork. In one village, a farmer weighs his options against the harvest he cannot eat. In another, a tax collector tallies yield before the crop is even cut. The empire's dream of solvency gleams faintly over their bent backs. What London saw as balance sheets, Bengal lived as famine. The opium poppy became the empire's strangest flower, one that promised medicine to the few and obedience to the many. The narrator lets the words linger before drawing the curtain of transition. Asterisk. To understand how this flower conquered more than fields, asterisk, it murmurs, asterisk, we must follow its roots through rivers and railways, across oceans of silt and silver. Asterisk. The camera tilts eastward, where the horizon glows faintly gold over the Bay of Bengal. The journey continues toward the alluvial plains, where poppy acreage expands like policy itself, spreading wherever revenue needs it to bloom. Ink pools and spreads across parchment, black as tidewater. The film opens on ledgers, one from the Canton Cohong, one from the London tea auctions pages glowing faintly in lamplight. Numbers march down columns like disciplined troops. Chest counts, silver weights, ship manifests, auction bids. The narrator's voice drifts through the quiet, measured and precise. Asterisk. Every empire tells its story in two languages, rhetoric and arithmetic. When the speeches fade, the sums remain. Asterisk. The sums were staggering. By the late 18th century, Britain drank tea by the ton. The East India Company alone imported tens of millions of pounds annually. Warehouses at the London docks bulged with chests bound for drawing rooms, inns, and factories. The camera translates the mania into small, tangible numbers. A weaver in Manchester consumed 2 cups a day. A clerk in Bristol, 3. London as a whole, enough to dye the Thames amber. Tea was less luxury than habit, a national bloodstream perfumed with leaves from China's hills. But those leaves had to be purchased in silver, and silver was finite. The Canton system made sure of that. The narrator paints it slowly. A single port, Guangzhou, or Canton, open to foreign trade. A handful of Hong merchants licensed to buy and sell on behalf of the empire. A ritual hierarchy that reduced foreigners to tributaries pretending to be grateful. No guns, no gospel, no guesswork, as one British merchant complained. Each deal required ceremony, paperwork, and patience. China's emperors saw no reason to hurry. The West's craving for tea met the East's indifference like wind meeting a wall. Asterisk silver, asterisk the voice continues. Asterisk became the language of that indifference. Asterisk coins minted in Mexico and Peru, shipped through India, melted in Canton's furnaces. They disappeared into vaults and temples, leaving Britain's reserves hollow. The Bank of England's directors, watching bullion vanish eastward, whispered of credit crises, of liquidity thinner than paper. Yet diplomacy offered no relief. The Qing court saw trade as tribute. Negotiation was humiliation. Britain needed a counterweight that could flow invisibly, reversing the current without breaking decorum. And so the market began to bend. If the Canton system narrowed the door, merchants built a floor beneath it. The forbidden commodity, opium, offered a perfect loophole. Officially condemned, unofficially tolerated, it moved through invisible channels that everyone pretended not to see. The narrator describes this paradox with almost tender irony. Asterisk prohibition is a polite word for shared blindness. So long as the trade stayed quiet, no one had to call it crime. Asterisk. Maps bloom across the screen routes twisting from Calcutta through the Bay of Bengal, around Macau, up the Pearl River. Small junks meet larger ships offshore, transferring cargo like conspirators in prayer. The trade works because everyone benefits in a way that keeps them from speaking. Hong merchants earn commissions, company agents reclaim silver, Qing officials secure local peace by refusing to notice. The moral rhetoric, ban the poison, coexists with practical tolerance. Don't make it my problem. The narrator lowers its tone to unveil a subtle twist. When European carriers risked exposure, another fleet filled the gap. American merchants. Sailing under neutral flags from Salem, Boston, and New York, they ferried Turkish and Indian opium into the same Chinese ports the British could not openly reach. Their ships bore innocuous cargo manifests, cotton, spices, miscellaneous goods, while their holds carried the empire's dirtiest arithmetic. Neutral, in politics, they were loyal only to profit. The revelation lands quietly, almost like admiration. Asterisk. When rules narrowed the doorway, asterisk, the narrator says, asterisk profits learned to crawl under the floorboards. Asterisk. The Canton system's rigidity had created its opposite, a global flexibility that no law could undo. British bureaucrats might deny complicity, Qing mandarins might feign ignorance, and American captains might claim coincidence. Yet the flow continued. Scarcity breeds workaround markets, prohibition breeds professionals. The network did not need permission, only pressure. The camera lingers on a teacup in London, the same pale amber as before, its reflection trembling with unseen motion. Asterisk. Every sip now tastes faintly of smoke and secrecy. Asterisk, the narrator murmurs. Asterisk. The silver that bought this comfort once lay in Chinese coffers, but soon it will return disguised as contraband and counted as credit. Asterisk. The screen brightens slightly, ledgers closing, locks turning, sails billowing east. Asterisk. From shortage to supply. Asterisk, the voice concludes. Asterisk. If opium repaired the empire's balance, who ensured there was always more to sell? Asterisk. The map tilts southward, toward Bengal green fields shimmering under the weight of expectation. The gavel falls with the crispness of ritual. Inside the East India Company's auction rooms in Calcutta, order reigns rows of clerks, the scrape of quills, the rustle of ledgers. Outside, the Hooghly River seethes with motion, barges unloading poppy resin packed in earthen jars, porters shouting, gulls circling above the smell of sugar and sweat. The narrator's voice glides between the two worlds, discipline in the hall, Chaos on the water. Asterisk. Here. Asterisk, it murmurs. Asterisk, illegality wore a waistcoat. Asterisk. Each spring, the company staged its opium auctions, transforming vice into spreadsheet predictability. The system was both simple and brilliant. Farmers across Bihar and Bengal had already delivered their resin to company factories, where it was weighed, graded, and pressed into uniform chests marked with a small, unmistakable seal, a lion, and the word Patna. The same bureaucracy that collected taxes now produced contraband. Licenses authorized planting. Advances to cultivators secured loyalty. Purchase contracts locked in prices months ahead. From these inputs came a product as standardized as coin. Inside the auction room, the narrator explains, scarcity became theatre. The company released just enough chests each quarter to keep prices high, withholding the rest in bonded warehouses, a stage-managed rhythm of abundance and restraint. Bidders crowded the room. Parsi traders from Bombay, Armenian brokers, British agents representing firms with names like Jardine, Dent, and Company. They knew the game. The company would never admit where the opium would end up, and the buyers would never ask. The fiction was mutually profitable. Asterisk, scarcity. Asterisk, the narrator continues. Asterisk is the surest way to make addiction respectable. Asterisk, bidders raised hands, shouted figures, jotted numbers in notebooks. Each sale created ripples far beyond the room prices that reached merchants in Canton before the ships themselves did. On the docks, news of the auction would move faster than the wind, recalibrating deals on the other side of the Bay of Bengal. In a trade defined by secrecy, these auctions provided the illusion of transparency. They allowed the illicit to inherit the credibility of the official. The camera moves closer to the faces. A Parsi broker calculating his margin in whispered Gujarati. A Scottish agent glancing at the clock, knowing the tide waits for no man. A Chinese intermediary standing quietly at the back, forbidden to bid, but noting every figure for partners across the sea. The narrator likens them to dancers in a finely timed choreography, each step rehearsed, each gesture loaded with consequence. Their networks ran on letters of credit that connected Bombay's banks to Hong Kong's warehouses. Theirs was a confidence trade. Faith in signatures, in seals, in the company's promise that the next auction would be just as orderly as this one. Then comes the first reveal, slipped in as calmly as a clerk, adding a column. Asterisk. The illicit Chinese trade was sustained by a perfectly licit Indian bureaucracy. Asterisk. Every barrel inspected, every chest weighed, every shipment insured. The company did not smuggle. It sold to those who did, with receipts and revenue to prove it. On paper, Britain remained righteous. In practice, its most disciplined institution had become the heartbeat of a global vice. The narrator leans in, voice soft but charged. Asterisk. Even risk was managed like cargo. Asterisk, insurance and reinsurance. Firms many based in London and Calcutta quietly underwrote every voyage. Premiums were calculated against monsoon, piracy, and seizure by Chinese patrols. Actuarial tables turned danger into decimals. The entire circuit, from Poppy Field to Pearl River, was balanced on mathematics. The wildest smuggling route in the world had been domesticated by accountants. What looked like chaos was, in truth, a clock. The gavel strikes again. The auction ends. Buyers sign contracts. Clerks record shipments. Silver changes hands with the elegance of choreography. Outside, the crates are loaded onto brigs and clippers, their holds smelling faintly of ink and resin. The river swallows them one by one, sending them toward the China coast. Asterisk. What if the world's wildest smuggling route was actually managed like a clock? Asterisk, the narrator asks. As sails fill and the ships tilt eastward into sunlight, the camera follows them out to sea. Ahead lies the narrow mouth of Canton, where order meets its mirror image law's choke chain and the fast ships that learn to outrun it. The sails arrive before the sound. In the dim light off Singapore, a hull cuts through the South China Sea so fast it seems to outrun its own reflection. Its name glints briefly across the bow times. Red Rover, asterisk asterisk Ariel, asterisk asterisk Falcon, asterisk, the new breed of ship, the Clipper. The narrator's voice comes low, unhurried, but the pace beneath it tightens. Asterisk Opium, moves best when it moves quickly. Asterisk speed, now, is no longer romance, it's revenue. These vessels, long and narrow, with masts that reach like ambition itself, are the physical embodiment of pressure. The East India Company's auctions in Calcutta have set prices. Canton's harbour has fixed demand. Everything between them is a race against time and tide. The faster a chest can cross the Bay of Bengal, skirt the Malay Peninsula, and reach the Pearl River Delta, the faster silver flows back to Bombay banks. The narrator calls it velocity as solvency. Each knot saved meant capital freed. A voyage that once took months could now be measured in weeks, compressing the empire's financial pulse. Merchants understood that time was the rarest cargo of all. Every day gained meant interest not paid, credit not strained, opportunity not lost. Asterisk. Speed. Asterisk. The voice explains. Asterisk. Wasn't adventure, it was compound interest made visible. Asterisk. The film glides along the decks, sailors reefing sails in darkness, lanterns masked against patrol eyes. Below, in the hold, chests of Patna and Malwa opium are stacked tight as chess pieces. The South China Sea ahead is no open road. It is a chessboard of law and defiance. Chinese customs junks patrol the estuaries. British and American smugglers play cat and mouse, slipping through shoals guided by coded lanterns and timed tides. When caught, the story is piracy. When successful, it is commerce. The distinction depends on the wind. The narrator lingers on one moment, a single night beacon flashing 3 times from a reef near Hainan. To the uninitiated, it's coincidence. To the trader, it's a message. Asterisk safe anchorage, buyer waiting. Asterisk. The camera pans across logbooks that read like music. Departed Calcutta received monsoon tailwind, unloaded Macau returns silver. On these pages, distance collapses into rhythm. The ships are less vessels than moving balance sheets. And with them rises a new kind of merchant, the smuggling firm as financial organism. Jardine, Matheson and Company, Dent and Co., Russell and Co., houses built on the margin between legality and weather. They chartered the fastest hulls, hired the most daring captains, and measured their fortunes not in cargo but in circulation. The clippers became their bond traders, racing against monsoon and morality alike. Asterisk. Speed is its own narcotic. Asterisk. The narrator muses. The empire grew addicted to tempo. The faster the ships, the steadier the ledgers, the less visible the sin. Insurance rates fell as reliability rose. Credit tightened. Fortunes stabilized. The image of the opium trader as gambler fades. In his place stands a logistics manager with a chronometer, turning the unpredictable sea into a spreadsheet. The camera widens, a flotilla of silhouettes slicing through dawn, sails catching the first fire of sunlight. The voice, almost wistful now, lets the metaphor settle. Asterisk. On these decks, time itself became contraband. Asterisk. It was smuggled, borrowed, stolen from the monsoon and sold back to investors as certainty. As the fleet vanishes toward the horizon, the water stills, and mist gathers again. Asterisk. Next comes the harbour. Asterisk. The narrator whispers. Asterisk Canton, where the journey ends in fog and paper, where ledgers and river currents decide who prospers and who disappears. Asterisk. Rain drips from the thatch of a Bengal hut, the sound slow and metronomic, like an unseen clock. The year is somewhere in the 1,770 seconds, a decade after Plassey, when the East India Company learned that conquest was cheaper on paper than on horseback. The narrator's voice glides over flooded fields and narrow canals, describing a world where empire learned to collect rather than command. Asterisk. The company ruled not with muskets. Asterisk. It says, asterisk, but with ledgers. Asterisk. We move through a village at planting season. Men stand knee-deep in mud, guiding oxen that once pulled ploughs for rice but now turn the earth for poppy. Pale green stalks sprout where grain once shimmered gold. In a courtyard, a clerk unwraps a packet of paper, a contract known as Times, Dayton. Asterisk, an advance against a crop that does not yet exist. His tone is courteous, his presence is law. The farmer, whose hands are already calloused by debt, presses a thumbprint beside his name. The narrator does not need to raise its voice. Asterisk. The most powerful weapon in the district wasn't a musket. It was a signature. Asterisk. The camera moves from one household to another, collecting fragments of witness. A tax collector's report notes proudly that acreage targets have been met without disturbance, though his account omits the guards who stood behind him. A cultivator's petition pleads for relief. The rains failed, the soil cracked, the poppy wilted, yet the revenue demand remains unchanged. A missionary's letter home describes fields of flowers that do not feed, marveling at their beauty and their futility. 3 voices, 3 registers, none shouting. The power lies in their calm. The narrator explains how coercion disguised itself as consent. Farmers were offered advances to grow poppy instead of grain cash that seemed generous until repayment came due. If they refused the contract, they lost access to credit, irrigation, or protection from tax collectors. If they accepted, they forfeited food security. Each signature tightened a circle that looked voluntary only from a distance. Free cultivation, in company reports, meant farmers free to starve on schedule. When the weather turned against them, too much rain, too little, never the right kind dependence deepened. Famine years in the 1,780 seconds and 1,790 seconds widened the company's grip. Peasants sold seed and tools to pay revenue. Next season, they borrowed again. Debt grew perennial, sprouting like the crop itself. Poppy was admired not only for its resin but for its reliability. It thrived administratively. Unlike rice, it required no milling, spoiled less in storage, and fetched a price stable enough to please accountants. For officials balancing ledgers in Calcutta, this was perfection disguised as agriculture. The narrator's cadence slows as we examine the crop's virtues through imperial eyes. Asterisk. Predictable grading, durable resin, high value for weight, steady demand overseas. Asterisk. A product almost immune to fluctuation, as neat as coin and far lighter to ship. Its expansion was not just encouraged, it was engineered. Revenue settlements, annual negotiations over land tax quietly folded poppy quotas into their calculations. Villages that produced beyond the target were rewarded with leniency. Those that resisted paid in coin or confiscation. Thus, voluntary acreage became mandatory by mathematics. We return to the field. The poppies sway in light wind, white and lilac, lovely enough to break the heart. A woman scrapes the pods with a blade, her wrists stained brown from the resin. Beside her, a child watches, too young to remember when the same plot grew food. The narrator's voice remains gentle, but every word cuts. Asterisk. This is how empire looked when conquest learned patience. No drums, no flags, just cycles of obligation turning quietly in the mud. Asterisk. Evening descends. A company agent weighs the day's yield in a brass bowl, noting the grade in his ledger. His handwriting is steady, practiced, untouched by what he measures. Behind him, clouds gather again, promising rain that may come too late or too soon. The field glistens with resin and exhaustion. As the scene fades, the narrator draws the line from soil to solvency. Asterisk. From these fields, revenue flowed to Calcutta, where resin became currency and currency became empire. To follow it is to watch labor dissolve into numbers, numbers into ships, ships into silver. Asterisk. The sound of the rain deepens, steady as a heartbeat. The transition arrives quietly, as if closing a book. Asterisk. From fields to exchanges. Asterisk. The narrator murmurs. Asterisk. Resin becomes revenue at the Calcutta auctions, then sails toward Canton. Asterisk. The auction room breathes like a theatre between acts, still air, ticking clocks, the faint rasp of pens. Beneath the high ceiling of Calcutta's exchange hall, chests of opium stand in regimented rows, each stamped with the lion of the East India Company. Dust motes spin in the light. Somewhere outside, the river groans under the weight of cargo waiting to move. The narrator's voice enters softly, as if not to disturb the calculations already in motion. Asterisk. This is where conquest is priced. Asterisk. Buyers gather, whispering in multiple languages. Gujarati, English, Armenian, the clipped cadence of Cantonese. Their attire varies. Bombay's Parsi brokers in fine cotton, Scottish agents in crumpled linen, company clerks with sleeves rolled to the elbow, but the mood is one of disciplined appetite. A company officer, seated near the dais, surveys the floor the way a general reads a battlefield, assessing confidence, detecting hesitation, ready to strike the gavel like artillery. The auctioneer calls the first lot. A clerk reads its grade, Patna, No. 1, pure and high density, and its reserve price. The bidding starts low, rises swiftly, and ends with a single nod. The entire process lasts seconds. A chest changes ownership, but not direction. It will leave Calcutta as predictably as the tide, carried by ships that already have buyers waiting in Canton. The narrator explains how this rhythm holds the empire together. Asterisk. Every sale is a pulse, every quarter an inhalation of silver. Asterisk. Grading standards are exacting, almost scientific. Each chest is weighed, drilled, sampled, and certified by company examiners. The malwa from central India, darker and coarser, sells at a discount. Benares resin trades mid-range. Patna commands the crown. Quality is not a moral issue but a metric, one that allows the invisible infrastructure to run without pause. Behind the auction's drama hums a machine of logistics. Warehouses along the Hooghly stacked floor to ceiling. Barges waiting at the ghats. Agency houses extending credit to bidders who will repay once the opium is resold at Canton. Names appear like constellations: Jardine, Matheson, Dent, Wadia, Ready Money. The narrator introduces them without myth or malice. Asterisk. They were logisticians of appetite. Asterisk, it says. Asterisk. They mastered roots, not morality. Asterisk. Jardine learned how to translate weeks into profit margins. Matheson perfected the relay of letters that let news of price shifts outrun the ships themselves. The great Parsi dynasts of Bombay Wadia, Banerjee, and Ready Money built fortunes on shipyards and speculation, bridging languages and ledgers. None of them saw themselves as villains. They were engineers of flow, turning addiction into arithmetic. The narrator pauses as if counting silently. Asterisk. In a good year, asterisk, it observes, asterisk, everyone ate, asterisk. Grain yields and resin outputs both rose. Cultivators paid their taxes, merchants met their quotas, and the machinery of trade turned smoothly. Asterisk. In a bad year, asterisk, the voice lowers. Asterisk, some grew richer. Asterisk, droughts, floods, or blight. Any event that thinned the harvest, lifted prices at the auction. Scarcity became windfall. Brokers speculated, hoarded, and sold at premiums, while the same weather starved the farmers who had grown the crop. An arithmetic obscenity baked into the model, suffering at one end as data at the other. A slow montage unfolds. Company clerks balancing columns, while famine telegrams arrive from Bihar, a Parsi broker signing a letter of credit, even as grain carts leave villages empty. An auctioneer's gavel striking like a metronome over the low murmur of hunger. The narrator remains steady, refusing outrage but not neutrality. Asterisk. The market does not weep. Asterisk, it says. Asterisk. It records. Asterisk. Outside, the city moves to the auction's rhythm. Warehouse workers stack chests, lash ropes, ready barges. A carriage clatters away toward the riverfront agency houses, where silver, paper, and promise intersect. The flow is seamless. Resin to contract, contract to coin, coin to cargo. The camera follows a chest as it is stamped, sealed, and carried out the door, its shadow merging with a line of porters descending toward the docks. The narrator's tone lightens, easing the viewer toward the next motion. Asterisk. With cargo purchased and financed. Asterisk. It says, asterisk. The story shifts to the sea, where Canton's rules met merchants' workarounds, and the tide itself became a negotiator. Asterisk. The last image holds a ship's hull gleaming under morning light, ropes taut, sails waiting for the wind that will turn profit into motion. The Hooghly widens toward the sea, carrying with it the faint scent of resin and ink. Barges move like insects under the humid light, each loaded with chests marked and sealed, company property turned private venture. Onshore, the auction room's noise has faded into the steady rhythm of the docks, pulleys creaking, sailors shouting, clerks reading manifests aloud. The narrator's voice lowers to a murmur that feels both final and anticipatory. Asterisk. By the time a chest left Calcutta, it had already become capital graded, insured, and promised to someone far away. Asterisk. The ledger's work was done. The sea's work was about to begin. Each shipment carried 2 cargoes, one visible, one invisible. The visible was resin, pressed and labelled for trade. The invisible was risk an entire economy's wager against law. Asterisk. Every chest that left Calcutta, asterisk, the narrator observes, asterisk carried a second cargo bet against the law. Asterisk. The camera drifts along the water's surface, following the procession of vessels heading south. Their holds are lined with chests, purchased by men whose fortunes depend on tides, weather, and diplomacy's blind spots. Letters of credit travel with them, tucked safely in oilskin envelopes. Marine insurers in London and Bombay have already calculated the probabilities: typhoon, seizure, mutiny. The risk of capture by Chinese patrols is factored neatly into premiums. Danger, at this stage, has been monetized. The opium trade no longer feels like smuggling, it feels like banking with sails. Yet beyond the horizon lies the variable no ledger can domesticate, Canton. The narrator describes it as both terminus and trap, a port where foreign ambition meets imperial order, where ships must hover offshore, waiting for permission that never quite arrives. British, Parsi, and American merchants know the choreography by heart. Drop anchor at Linton Island or Whampoa, transfer cargo to smaller boats, and slip past customs under the cover of fog. Each maneuver is a negotiation between daring and decorum. We glimpse the architecture of this maritime grey zone. Hulks anchored just beyond the jurisdiction line, serving as floating warehouses, receiving ships that disguise contraband beneath stacks of cotton. Cutters that hug the coastline, their lanterns coded to blink like constellations. The narrator calls it a time's commerce of shadows. Asterisk. At night, the estuary becomes a living map, currents, sandbanks, and signals all translating profit into motion. Back in Calcutta, the records stay tidy. The company has technically sold its stock. Responsibility dissolves into private hands. Each ship is both denial and proof. When news reaches the directors months later that another fleet has evaded imperial patrols, they will shake their heads publicly and raise the next quarter's revenue target privately. The hypocrisy no longer shocks anyone. It has simply become infrastructure. The camera lingers on a single chest being lifted aboard a ship. The stenciled letters Patna 1837 flash briefly before vanishing into the hold. The narrator's voice softens, threading anticipation through calm. Asterisk. This resin has crossed its first frontier. The next waits where rivers widen into politics. Asterisk. Sails unfurl. Drums signal departure. The ships catch the monsoon wind, leaning east toward the Pearl River Delta toward Canton, where legality ends and ingenuity begins. Asterisk. From land and ledger to tide and lantern. Asterisk. The voice concludes. Asterisk. We follow the cargo into the maze of China's maritime twilight. Asterisk. Mist folds over the Pearl River Delta, softening every outline until law and water look the same. The camera glides toward Canton, city of rules, rituals, and rehearsed suspicion. The narrator's voice is calm, almost reverent. Asterisk. Here, trade moved according to ceremony, not wind. Asterisk. Inside the walls, the Qing bureaucracy performed its choreography. Decrees read aloud against foreign corruption. Edicts posted forbidding opium, mandarins recording contraband seizures that would never reach the capital. Outside, at the river's mouth, the same empire watched silver flow homeward and said nothing too loudly. The Kohong, the Guild of Licensed Merchants, still monopolized official exchange. Their hongs, or trading houses, lined the riverbank like ornate cages, each window looking out toward the factories where foreigners lived in constrained privilege. The foreigners' quarters were their entire world. A few acres of warehouses, counting rooms, and dormitories pressed between city wall and river. Flags from every maritime nation hung limp in the heat, marking territories no wider than courtyards. Tea, silk, and porcelain moved through this corridor of politeness. Opium, of course, did not. Officially, it did not exist. But just a few miles downstream, beyond the reach of the city's gaze, reality looked different. At Linton Island and Whampoa Reach, hulks decommissioned ships, stripped to their bones, floated at anchor. Their holds were packed with chests from Calcutta, each one catalogued by number and code. Lanterns flickered across their decks like fireflies, signaling to smaller boats approaching from the coast. These hulks were the Empire's shadow ports, where opium was exchanged as quietly as breath. The narrator's tone remains tranquil. Asterisk. On paper, the door was locked. On water, the key was always waiting. Asterisk. Signals carried the commerce. A single lantern meant ready to load. 2 meant buyer waiting. 3 meant danger. Some nights, buyers arrived in sleek coastal junks, their crews chanting softly as they hauled crates up from the surf. Other times, intermediaries handled the exchange. Compradors trusted by both sides to manage payment and delivery. They served as interpreters, brokers, and guarantors, human escrow systems, who knew exactly how much to reveal to which official. The narrator turns the focus to process, not adventure. Asterisk. Smuggling here was not chaos, it was choreography. Asterisk. Silver payments were often prearranged through networks in Macau or Hong Kong, recorded in ledgers kept by comprador accountants, who would later settle accounts ashore. Insurance covered even the risk of interception. Fines for seizures were entered as operational expenses. The first reveal unfolds with calm irony. Many customs chases ended by arrangement. A patrol would appear, shots fired into the air, a symbolic pursuit ensued, and finally, the confiscated cargo, usually a fraction of the whole, was tallied. The fines were paid through intermediaries, officials filed their reports, and the trade resumed. Asterisk. Punishment became paperwork. Asterisk. The narrator observes. Asterisk. The law survived because it learned how to lose profitably. Asterisk. The camera glides over faces. An interpreter keeping 2 stories straight at once. A pilot steering through shoals with memory instead of compass. A petty customs officer collecting his unspoken share of the tide. These are not villains, only functionaries in a system that balanced ideology with income. The narrator gives them weight without judgment. Asterisk. The machine required grease. Asterisk, it says simply. Asterisk. These were the men who supplied it. Asterisk. Evening settles again. From the vantage of the hulks, Canton's lights shimmer upriver, a city of prohibition illuminating a sea of permission. The foreign captains dine under canvas awnings, discussing exchange rates and monsoon forecasts. Onshore, officials dictate fresh bans against opium while sipping tea bought with its proceeds. The paradox is complete. The empire enforces its virtue while budgeting its vice. The narrator's voice slows to a whisper that feels like tide turning. Asterisk. This was Canton's genius stringent law. Onshore, elastic practice offshore. A civilization of ceremony that found flexibility in the dark. Asterisk. The final image lingers on a single chest being lowered into a small boat, its seal reflecting moonlight. As the oars push away, ripples erase its trace. Asterisk. From mechanisms to consequences. Asterisk. The narrator concludes. Asterisk. We must now ask who inhaled the smoke, who counted the silver, and what that arithmetic did to the state itself. Asterisk. Lantern light spills through thin paper screens, turning the air the color of amber. Inside, the den is quiet, not the chaos of vice imagined in missionary tracts, but something slower, ritualized. The narrator's voice is hushed, observant rather than moral. Asterisk. A pipe, a match, a breath. Asterisk. Smoke unwinds like thread, connecting men who once worked the docks or handled ledgers in the hongs. For them, opium is less escape than punctuation, the pause that softens exhaustion. The camera drifts past, faces half hidden in shadow. Asterisk. Every empire has its sleep. Asterisk. The voice murmurs. Asterisk. This was China's drowsing moment, but not its dream. Asterisk. Outside these rooms, the true intoxication is arithmetic. The same smoke that clouds lungs also clouds the empire's balance sheets. The narrator moves us to another chamber, brighter, filled with sound. The treasury offices of Canton. Clerks tally the outflow of silver as merchants remit their payments for foreign goods. The ledgers shimmer like mirrors of the dens. Asterisk. For every inhalation in the alley, a coin exhaled from the mint. Asterisk. The silver problem haunts every corridor of government. China's economy, long stable on a silver standard, begins to tremble as bullion drains outward. The more opium flows in, the more silver flows out. Rice prices fluctuate, coolie wages thin, and rents in city wards climb beyond reach. The government's addiction, the narrator suggests, mirrors the smoker's dependency masked as control. Asterisk. The pipe required smoke, the state required silver. Neither could stop without collapse. Asterisk. Officials find themselves trapped between virtue and viability. Edicts from Beijing demand purity. Markets demand continuity. Suppress too harshly, and merchants vanish. Tax receipts dwindle. Unrest simmers. Tolerate too much, and moral authority dissolves. The narrator's tone stays even, the cadence judicial. Asterisk. Governance became triage. Too little. Restraint meant chaos. Too much meant famine. Asterisk. In provincial reports, the paradox surfaces as bureaucratic poetry. A governor writes that the sea of commerce must be fenced but not frozen. Another notes, the people trade with shadows, and the shadows feed the treasury. Everyone understands what this means. Opium revenues, though unsanctioned, lubricate the empire's machinery. Corruption becomes liquidity. Then comes the twist spoken softly, almost like an aside. Asterisk. Not all anti-opium campaigns were about saving souls. Some were about stabilizing silver. Asterisk. The narrator explains how reformers noticed that moral decay and fiscal depletion were twin symptoms of the same disease. Each chest of opium imported represented not only a moral loss, but a measurable loss in specie. The treasury's reserves shrank as silver sailed toward Calcutta, leaving behind paper notes, unpaid soldiers, and inflation that eroded trust. The outcry against vice was, in many cases, an outcry for solvency. The camera crossfades between two kinds of addiction: a smoker exhaling slowly, a clerk counting coins with trembling fingers. The imagery collapses the boundary between individual and state. Asterisk. Dependence. Asterisk. The narrator says. Asterisk is never solitary. The empire itself began to crave the very trade. It condemned its taxes, its bribes, its hush money. It could not breathe without the poison it forbade. Asterisk. We follow a local magistrate walking along the riverbank at dusk, his face unreadable. He has enforced raids, confiscated pipes, punished smugglers, yet tonight he walks past a warehouse known to store contraband. The men inside bow, not in fear but recognition. He nods once, continues on. His silence buys calm. The narrator's tone carries no judgment, only fatigue. Asterisk. Every moral line eventually blurs into a budget line. Asterisk. Meanwhile, the court in Beijing issues edicts that ripple outward like stones in water, declarations of virtue that dissipate before they reach the coast. The merchants, compradors, and provincial officials all know how to absorb such shock. A donation here, a promise there, enough to sustain the fiction of control. The story returns to the treasury, now darker, the clerk's lamps burning low. A senior accountant closes a ledger and seals it with wax, though he knows the numbers no longer balance. The silver drain has become permanent, like a fever that breaks only to return. The narrator's voice gathers quiet strength. Asterisk. What if the crisis was not just in the pipe, but in the mint? Asterisk. The camera pans upward through layers of smoke and cloud, revealing the distant capital, where a new figure reads the reports and refuses resignation. His name will become the empire's reckoning. Asterisk. From Strain comes a protagonist of principle, Lin Zexu, whose pen set in motion the empire's loudest silence war. Asterisk. Smoke still hangs over the Pearl River, but its texture has changed. It no longer drifts lazily from pipes and ship lanterns. It rises from papers burned after inspection raids. The tide of tolerance is ebbing. The narrator's voice returns, steady but sharpened, the calm before a storm. Asterisk. Surveillance has become policy. The watchers now have orders. Asterisk. Across the delta, seizures multiply. Patrol junks move at dusk, guided by new directives from Canton's Governor-General. Warehouses once ignored are searched. Compradors questioned. Petty officials demoted for leniency. Yet the trade continues only quieter, cleverer. The camera glides through back alleys where merchants murmur over ledgers now written in code. On Linton's hulks, captains tighten their schedules, loading at night and slipping down river before sunrise. Every confiscation breeds adaptation. Letters begin to thicken the air as much as smoke once did. Couriers hurry between Canton and Beijing, their satchels bulging with memoranda. In these papers, the tone hardens. The court demands results. The provinces promise them. Edicts now name foreign merchants directly, though few of those names are written correctly. The bureaucracy strains to define an enemy. It barely understands. A network without borders, an addiction without face. The narrator's voice softens. Asterisk. An empire that once measured time by dynasties was now counting by shipments. Asterisk. Foreign merchants, reading the shift, consolidate downstream. The British and American firms gather their ships near Macau and Hong Kong's coves, outside the jurisdiction line but close enough for news to travel by oar. Jardine and Matheson, Dent & Co., and the Americans of Russell & Co. form a kind of informal parliament aboard anchored hulks, debating risk as if drafting weather reports. The profits are still immense, but the certainty that once smoothed every ledger has begun to tremble. Each new imperial decree makes the next voyage a little more dangerous and a little more lucrative. The narrator calls this moment times the breath before arithmetic explodes. Asterisk. For decades, the trade had thrived in ambiguity. Laws half enforced, bribes half acknowledged, ships half visible in fog. Now, the balance falters. Local officials, long complicit, find themselves exposed. Their own letters are intercepted, their signatures questioned. Fines become arrests. The moral panic and fiscal crisis, once parallel, now intersect. And into that intersection steps a new kind of official, unyielding, methodical, incorruptible. His name circulates first as rumour among the merchants. Lin Zexu, a provincial administrator known for temperance and precision. His arrival is discussed in tones of wary respect. One captain calls him the man who might make the sea his courtroom. The narrator lingers on a folded letter, sealed in red wax. It leaves Canton on horseback, bound north to the throne. In it, Lin demands an end to equivocation, warning that if virtue cannot command the coast, it will drown beneath it. The camera follows the courier across mountains and plains until the parchment reaches Beijing, where it will ignite a chain of orders that cross continents. Asterisk. One letter. Asterisk. The narrator whispers. Asterisk. Would make the ocean suddenly very small. Asterisk. In London's counting houses, the same names Jardine, Matheson, Dent, watch from the opposite shore, sensing that patience will soon require powder. The storm is no longer theoretical. It has found its herald. Asterisk. Enter Lin Zexu. Asterisk. The voice concludes. Asterisk. And the confrontation with Jardine and Matheson that would redraw maps. Asterisk. The camera opens on a set of scales, silver tails balanced against copper cash, each coin glinting like a captured moon. A slow tilt begins. One side sinks, the other rises. The narrator's voice enters, calm as gravity itself. Asterisk. Empires rarely fall from a shout. They settle, millimetre by millimetre, under the weight of numbers. Asterisk. Silver was China's bloodstream. For centuries, taxes were paid in it, rents assessed by it, and wages measured against it. Its purity guaranteed trust across regions where dialects divided speech. But now the flow had reversed. Opium smoked in riverfront rooms had a second life as arithmetic, each puff sending silver seaward, each chest draining the treasury by ounces that became tons. The narrator paints a simple picture. Asterisk. Imagine an enormous table supported by 4 legs: grain, labour, credit, and silver. Remove one leg, and the table does not fall immediately. It wobbles. But everything placed upon it begins to slide. Asterisk. The wobble began in whispers. A merchant unable to meet payroll, a landlord demanding rent early, a governor reporting short receipts from tax collectors. The empire had survived famines and rebellions before, but this was different. Famine could be fed, rebellion crushed. Arithmetic, once disturbed, answered to no emperor. The film moves between counting rooms and market stalls. Clerks scratch recalculations into ledgers. Rice sellers shout prices that change by the hour. Silver's departure tightened credit everywhere. Tax collectors demanded payment in metal, not grain, because paper notes now bought less each week. Those who owed taxes found themselves trapped, debts rising, incomes shrinking. The narrator's tone remains explanatory, not dramatic. Asterisk. This was not a crisis of morality or military might. It was plumbing, monetary plumbing. Asterisk. China's system depended on a delicate bimetal ratio between silver and copper. Peasants paid daily transactions in copper cash, but major debts in silver. When opium siphoned bullion outward, silver grew scarcer and more expensive relative to copper. Overnight, the poor discovered that their handfuls of coins bought less rice, paid fewer rents. Wages lagged, prices drifted upward, and even honest trade felt rigged. The narrator pauses, inviting a broader view. Across the world, silver's journey wrote invisible equations between continents. In Mexico, mines churned out bullion that flowed to Manila, then across the South China Sea into Canton's vaults, until opium turned the river backward. London's bankers watched exchange ratios fluctuate and quietly adjusted credit to profit from the imbalance. For China's farmers, the change was invisible but merciless. What they once paid with 1 measure of copper now cost 3. Then comes the reveal, spoken gently but cutting deep. Asterisk. Deflation, born of silver's scarcity, rewarded those who already had silver and punished those who owed it. Asterisk. The landlords, officials, and merchants with hoarded reserves saw their purchasing power climb. Their vaults grew heavier without adding a single coin. Meanwhile, peasants and traders found their debts swelling in real terms. The same sum now cost twice the labor to repay. What looked like a neutral fluctuation was, in fact, quiet class warfare by arithmetic. The film lingers on small scenes. A tenant weighing his landlord's silver tael, eyes downcast. A widow counting copper coins she knows will not reach the tax quota. An official polishing ingots in a treasury that feels emptier each season. The numbers change slowly, but relentlessly, like erosion. Asterisk. Empires do not collapse in noise. Asterisk. The narrator repeats. Asterisk. They exhale, fraction by fraction. Asterisk. For officials in Beijing, the crisis looked like a leak, something to be sealed, not understood. They issued new edicts, demanded stricter collection, scolded provincial treasurers. None of it stemmed the flow. Silver had become liquidity in the truest sense. It followed slope and gravity, ignoring command. The narrator's tone softens toward transition. Asterisk. Pressure invites moral theatre. Asterisk, it says. Asterisk. When systems falter, the righteous reach for symbols. And one man, upright, incorruptible, believed he could stop the empire's bleeding by smashing the pipe itself. Asterisk. The camera pans from the scales to a map, silver veins flowing like rivers back toward the sea. The line ends at Canton, where Lin Zexu's pen waits poised over paper, ready to turn numbers into orders. The war that followed was brief, uneven, and strangely impersonal. The narrator's voice remains composed, almost detached, as cannon fire flashes across haze-thick horizons. Asterisk. On one side, an empire of ritual. On the other, an empire of engines. Asterisk. Steamships push upriver against wind and current, their iron hulls gliding past wooden junks that splinter under a single broadside. The Chinese soldiers fight with courage, but without parity, matchlocks against muskets, fort walls against floating batteries. The narrator does not linger on spectacle. Asterisk. This was not a war of valor, asterisk, it explains. Asterisk, but of tempo and paperwork. Asterisk. British strategy was mathematical. Steam reduced distance, logistics replaced bravery. For every skirmish fought, 3 more were avoided, through threat alone. Coastal forts fell not from siege, but surrender to inevitability. Diplomats trailed the gunboats like accountants, measuring indemnities before the smoke had cleared. The empire of porcelain and silver met the empire of iron and credit, and arithmetic decided faster than armies could. Yet the narrator insists the outcome was not written in gunpowder, but in grammar. Asterisk. The real battle was won in ink. Asterisk. In 1842, aboard a British warship anchored off the Yangtze, the Treaty of Nanjing was signed. Its clauses read like footnotes to history, but would prove world-changing. The narrator's tone stays serene, as if reciting a balance sheet. First, the indemnity. 21 million silver dollars to be paid in installments enough to repay the merchant's losses and fund a new phase of empire. Second, the opening of 5 ports, Canton, Amoy, Fuzhou, Ningbo, and Shanghai, to foreign residents and trade. Third, the cession of Hong Kong, a rocky island soon to be remade into a metropolis of credit. Each clause turned defeat into infrastructure. The narrator traces the invisible sequel. The indemnity payments demanded more silver, tightening the spiral first spun by opium. To meet obligations, Chinese treasuries borrowed, taxes rose, land changed hands. What looked like peace was economic re-engineering. The empire's financial system reoriented outward, tied to sterling and global exchange. Meanwhile, the victors formalized new habits. Banks, brokerages, and consulates followed the gunboats ashore. A map fades in, showing the new treaty ports blinking into existence like lanterns along the coast. Steam and telegraph lines soon connect them, turning geography into network. The narrator observes gently, asterisk. The treaty ended a war but began an equation. Asterisk. Within a decade, merchants who once hid in river fog now built offices under foreign flags. Smugglers became shareholders. Contraband became commodity. The coercion of the battlefield translated seamlessly into the language of contracts. The film closes the chapter with a slow pan over the Yangtze, sunlight glinting on calm water where smoke once stood. The empire's cannons are silent, its customs houses, newly opened, hum with foreign clerks. The narrator's voice settles into quiet reflection. Asterisk. The war was fought with powder. Asterisk, it says. Asterisk, but peace was written with pen and seal. And that ink, once dry, would stain every account book to come. Asterisk. From capitulation to capitalization, the current flows forward to banks, brokers, and a newborn city that turned smoke into stock. The war that followed was brief, uneven, and strangely impersonal. The narrator's voice remains composed, almost detached, as cannon fire flashes across haze-thick horizons. Asterisk. On one side, an empire of ritual, on the other, an empire of engines. Asterisk. Steamships push upriver against wind and current, their iron hulls gliding past wooden junks that splinter under a single broadside. The Chinese soldiers fight with courage but without parity, matchlocks against muskets, fort walls against floating batteries. The narrator does not linger on spectacle. Asterisk. This was not a war of valor. Asterisk. It explains. Asterisk. But of tempo and paperwork. Asterisk. British strategy was mathematical. Steam reduced distance. Logistics replaced bravery. For every skirmish fought, 3 more were avoided through threat alone. Coastal forts fell, not from siege, but surrender to inevitability. Diplomats trailed the gunboats like accountants, measuring indemnities before the smoke had cleared. The empire of porcelain and silver met the empire of iron and credit, and arithmetic decided faster than armies could. Yet the narrator insists the outcome was not written in gunpowder but in grammar. Asterisk. The real battle was won in ink. Asterisk. In 1842, aboard a British warship anchored off the Yangtze, the Treaty of Nanjing was signed. Its clauses read like footnotes to history but would prove world-changing. The narrator's tone stays serene, as if reciting a balance sheet. First, the indemnity. 21 million silver dollars to be paid in installments, enough to repay the merchant's losses and fund a new phase of empire. Second, the opening of 5 ports, Canton, Amoy, Fuzhou, Ningbo, and Shanghai, to foreign residents and trade. Third, the cession of Hong Kong, a rocky island soon to be remade into a metropolis of credit. Each clause turned defeat into infrastructure. The narrator traces the invisible sequel. The indemnity payments demanded more silver, tightening the spiral first spun by opium. To meet obligations, Chinese treasuries borrowed, taxes rose, land changed hands. What looked like peace was economic re-engineering. The empire's financial system reoriented outward, tied to sterling and global exchange. Meanwhile, the victors formalized new habits. Banks, brokerages, and consulates followed the gunboats ashore. A map fades in, showing the new treaty ports blinking into existence like lanterns along the coast. Steam and telegraph lines soon connect them, turning geography into network. The narrator observes gently. Asterisk. The treaty ended a war but began an equation. Asterisk. Within a decade, merchants who once hid in river fog now built offices under foreign flags. Smugglers became shareholders. Contraband became commodity. The coercion of the battlefield translated seamlessly into the language of contracts. The film closes the chapter with a slow pan over the Yangtze, sunlight glinting on calm water where smoke once stood. The empire's cannons are silent, its customs, houses, newly opened, hum with foreign clerks. The narrator's voice settles into quiet reflection. Asterisk. The war was fought with powder. Asterisk, it says. Asterisk. But peace was written with pen and seal. And that ink, once dry, would stain every account book to come. Asterisk. From capitulation to capitalization, the current flows forward to banks, brokers, and a newborn city that turns smoke into stock. Ink spreads like a tide across two hemispheres. In Canton, Lin Zexu's brush moves with disciplined grace, each character deliberate, each line a moral argument. In London, James Matheson sharpens his pen, drafting memoranda that transform outrage into lobbying strategy. Between them lies half the world's distance, but the battle has already begun. Asterisk. History remembers wars of cannon. Asterisk. The narrator says softly. Asterisk. This one was first a war of paragraphs. Asterisk. Lin writes in the cadence of empire. Asterisk. Heaven has given us virtue, and we must defend it, lest we fail both people and throne. Asterisk. His letters, dispatched to Queen Victoria and the British merchants in Canton, combine moral clarity with administrative logic. He appeals not to sentiment but to symmetry. Would Britain allow such poison in its own ports? He sees the empire's body as sacred, opium, a foreign infection. Asterisk. If your country forbids this drug, asterisk, he writes, asterisk, how can you sell it to ours? Asterisk. The question is less accusation than mirror. Meanwhile, Jardine and Matheson, longtime partners in the opium trade, prepare their own paper front. Jardine, recently returned to Britain, composes memoranda for the Foreign Office. His tone is pragmatic, almost weary. Asterisk. Trade must have liberty, or the Crown will lose both honour and market. Asterisk. He insists the conflict is not moral, but contractual. British merchants, he argues, operate under the assumption of fair exchange, and China's closure of ports is an affront to commercial civilization. The narrator draws the contrast gently but sharply. Asterisk. For Lin, duty was cosmic order. For Jardine, duty was market order. Asterisk. The scene unfolds in parallel. Lin's inkstone and Jardine's blotter, two desks facing opposite directions on the globe. The narrator reads from Lin's correspondence, his prose elegant yet urgent. Asterisk. The smoke has entered not only the homes of the poor, but the temples of scholars. To allow this is to abandon benevolence. Asterisk. Then, from Matheson's letters to London. Asterisk. If Her Majesty's government will not protect British interests, the Americans surely will. Asterisk. Each side writes as if logic could bend oceans. At first, British politicians waver. In Parliament, speeches echo with unease. Some MPs decry the trade as inhuman traffic, likening it to slavery. Missionaries and reformers publish pamphlets condemning national hypocrisy. Asterisk. How shall Christian England stand before the world while it profits from vice? Asterisk. Newspapers argue both sides. The Times calls Lin a fanatic in silk, while the Times Morning Chronicle Times wonders whether commerce has devoured conscience. The public, sipping tea sweetened by the very system under debate, absorbs the contradiction without resolution. The narrator emphasizes that neither Lin nor Jardine was villain or saint. Both defended systems larger than themselves. Lin represented a vision of governance where moral order sustained political order. Jardine, a world where property and profit justified presence. Their correspondence, though never direct, formed a dialogue of empires, one fluent in ethics, the other in economics. Then comes the twist. Moral hesitation in Britain nearly stalls intervention. Cabinet debates drag on for months. Lord Melbourne's government hesitates to authorise force. Critics warn that war for opium would shame the nation. But numbers whisper louder than sermons. Shipping interests in Liverpool and the City of London lobby the Treasury. Investors in the East India Company argue that lost markets will unbalance India's revenue system. Behind polite committees and pamphlets, pressure mounts. The narrator describes pamphlets printed by the thousand, sent to editors and MPs, framing the issue as one of free trade and British dignity. Jardine's arguments take on new life as rhetoric for empire. That China's restrictions insult not just merchants, but the principle of global exchange, asterisk. Moral discomfort yielded to economic necessity, asterisk, the voice concludes. Asterisk. In the Arithmetic of Empire, virtue could be postponed. Asterisk. As Britain moves toward confrontation, Lin intensifies his enforcement, still believing words can hold back tides. He writes one last memorial, asterisk. If the barbarians come by sea, they may break our walls, but they cannot shake our duty. Asterisk. The narrator lets the sentence linger, its nobility edged with inevitability. Paper crosses oceans, carrying justification disguised as correspondence. Both men act within reason, yet reason itself divides. Lin's brush dries beside a sealed dispatch to Beijing. Jardine's final memorandum lands on a minister's desk in Whitehall. Somewhere between them, the war has already been decided. Asterisk. Principle meets pressure. Asterisk. The narrator concludes. Asterisk. Once treaties crack the door, capital will pour in to build new institutions, cities born of commerce, shaped by contradiction. Asterisk. The smoke that once drifted above Linton now curls from chimneys. The trade has changed costume. Where gunboats once guarded cargo, now stand agency houses tall, symmetrical, solid. The narrator's tone steadies, neither approving nor condemning. Asterisk. The same profits that once slipped through fog now rise in brick and ledger. Asterisk. Jardine Matheson and Co. Once an agile brokerage in Canton's back alleys, has become a prototype for something larger. The modern conglomerate. We begin inside its office, an expanse of desks, telegraphs, and ledgers. Clerks record consignments, calculate exchange rates, and file insurance claims. What was once contraband has matured into a business plan. The narrator maps the transformation. Asterisk. Shipping, insurance, banking, and real estate, all braided into one rope, strong enough to pull empires. Asterisk. Jardine Matheson no longer sells opium alone. It sells movement, certainty, infrastructure. Ships carry anything that floats and pays silk, tea, machinery, each voyage hedged, insured, and financed through the same network that once serviced smuggling. The firm's genius lies not just in ships, but in structure. Jardine's partner houses in Calcutta, Bombay, and London form a circuit of credit that makes distance irrelevant. Bills of exchange replace bullion. Insurance policies translate weather into risk ratios. The narrator's voice stays calm, admiring the precision without glorifying it. Asterisk. Illicit profits learn to behave like capital. Asterisk. The chests that once evaded customs now endow godowns, docks, and warehouses built to last generations. The camera widens to show the city taking shape Hong Kong's raw coastline after its cession in 1842. Granite bluffs yield to scaffolds, and the first docks rise under a haze of sawdust and ambition. Jardine Matheson claims one of the island's prime ridges, where a wind-cool mansion will soon overlook the harbour. Around it cluster counting houses, shipyards, and godowns storing goods from every continent. On the waterfront, Chinese labourers unload cargo side by side with European seamen, the rhythm of empire echoing in hammer blows. The narrator introduces the compradors, the essential intermediaries who keep the machine fluent. Asterisk. No contract crossed language or custom without them. Asterisk. They translate more than words, they translate trust. A comprador knows which officials to gift, which families to credit, which rumours to believe. For their discretion, they earn a share of every deal, and a fragile kind of prestige, wealthy but never equal. In their hands, opium silver becomes credit, and credit becomes construction. Their fortunes anchor the hybrid world growing around the docks, a new class of brokers straddling empire and tradition. As the montage unfolds, the narrator traces money's metamorphosis. Asterisk. Vice learned to launder itself through architecture. Asterisk. Dock walls, carved from granite, absorb the morality of those who built them, grey stone rising from grey money. The firms invest in schools, hospitals, and churches, institutions meant to civilize and sanctify. British investors call it philanthropy. Local families call it prudence. The same accounts that once recorded bribes and seizures now list dividends and donations. The tone remains measured, almost hypnotic. Asterisk. Brick by brick, vice bought virtue. Asterisk. A map overlays the screen, tracing the flow of capital. Calcutta to Hong Kong, Hong Kong to London, London to Shanghai. The firm diversifies into textiles, silk, and tea, trades once considered respectable. Yet the seed money is unchanged. Every banknote still smells faintly of smoke. The narrator calls this the Times alchemy of legitimacy. Asterisk. Over time, investors forget origins. Institutions inherit the polish of marble, but keep the instincts of profit that built them. Inside a new branch office, a British accountant closes a ledger embossed with the company crest. On the same desk rests a copy of The Times, asterisk, reporting debates in Parliament about free trade and morality. The irony is unremarked. The opium lords have become industrialists, their empire now one of interest rates, not indulgence. The city around them, Hong Kong, is their monument. A port born of prohibition, a marketplace erected on a confiscation. The narrator's voice draws the thread tight. Asterisk. The treaties did more than open doors. They changed the floor plan of Asia's commerce. Where empires once met at gunpoint, they now meet at the counting desk. Asterisk. The camera pulls back to the harbour at dusk, cranes silhouetted against a rising skyline. Asterisk. Next comes the new geography, treaty ports, and the birth of Hong Kong finance. Asterisk. The camera rises over the South China Sea, morning light catching on a cluster of jagged rocks. Below, waves break against coves too small for villages, too shallow for fleets. From above, it looks like little more than a punctuation mark between worlds. The narrator's voice arrives, smooth and certain. Asterisk. An island became an invoice. Asterisk. After the Treaty of Nanjing, Britain claims Hong Kong not as conquest, but as collateral, a useful anchorage that will soon become something larger. The narrator speaks like an accountant reciting poetry. Asterisk. Here, empire found its new headquarters. Not a fortress, but a filing cabinet with a harbour. Asterisk. The opium machine, once hidden in fog and subterfuge, no longer needs darkness. It prefers daylight, leases, and legal guarantees. The trade that had survived by ambiguity now thrives on architecture. The film pans over early sketches, surveyors marking parcels of land, clerks unrolling maps across trestle tables, officers debating lease terms under makeshift tents. The ink dries faster than the mortar. Within months, warehouses rise along the shore, times go-downs, times replacing hulks, docks replacing coves. Company flags snap in the wind, where once lanterns flickered in secrecy. A new pattern emerges, revenue drawn not from contraband but from rent, interest, and storage. Smuggling has become logistics, speculation has become governance. The narrator walks us through the logic. Asterisk. With legal footholds, trade no longer requires evasion, it requires infrastructure. Asterisk. The same merchants who once bribed customs officials now petition for courts and commercial codes. They buy plots, pave streets, and draft ordinances that guarantee what violence once purchased. In these new treaty ports, Canton, Shanghai, Ningbo, and above all Hong Kong, the boundaries between empire and enterprise dissolve. A business model becomes a blueprint for urban life. The camera glides through the newborn settlement, narrow lanes filled with hammer blows, Chinese stonemasons setting granite blocks for foreign firms. On the slopes above, colonial villas climb toward the ridge, each one a lookout and a ledger entry. Ships anchor by the dozen, their flags mirrored in the harbour below. The narrator's voice stays calm, reverent, without romance. Asterisk. Here, geography itself began to balance accounts. Asterisk. As night falls, The lights along the waterfront burn steadily. Where poppy resin once defined the empire's margins, now gas lamps mark its center. Banks, insurers, and shipping companies align their facades in orderly rows, as if the skyline were a balance sheet written in stone. The island that was once a refuge for smugglers becomes the ledger of legitimacy, its streets named for governors, brokers, and ships that once ferried contraband. The narrator draws the circle closed. Asterisk. The opium system has completed its metamorphosis, from shadow to statute, from secrecy to skyline. What began as contraband now finances courts, schools, and churches. The empire's vice has learned the language of virtue and built it into the land itself. Asterisk. The final shot widens. The harbour gleams, ringed by new piers and warehouses, while survey lines stretch toward the hills. The island is no longer a frontier, it's a forecast. Asterisk. We turn now to the architecture of treaties. Asterisk. The voice concludes. Asterisk. And the scaffolding of a new financial order. Asterisk. The camera opens on parchment rather than battlefield. Wax seals gleam, ribbons hang limp, and a clerk's hand glides across the page. The sound is soft, pen on paper, not steel on steel. Asterisk. Treaties look gentle. Asterisk. The narrator begins. Asterisk. But they remake the world with quieter force. Asterisk. The Treaty of Nanjing, signed in 1842, appears first a document of 12 clauses that would redraw Asia's economic anatomy. The narrator speaks evenly, as though explaining a machine. Asterisk. Clause by clause, it turned defeat into infrastructure. Asterisk. Indemnities, 21 million silver dollars, payable in installments that funneled Chinese bullion into British banks. Tariff limits, fixed duties that removed uncertainty, allowing merchants to calculate profit before ships even left the dock. Extraterritoriality, foreign subjects now tried in their own consular courts, shielded from local law. The most favoured nation clause, every privilege granted to one power extended automatically to all. Asterisk. Paper walls stronger than stone gates. Asterisk. The narrator lingers on why these phrases mattered not to lawyers, but to ledgers. Predictable tariffs lowered risk. Secure jurisdiction reassured investors. Insurance premiums dropped. Trade volumes rose. Indemnities, though paid as punishment, re-entered circulation as loans British capital, recycling Chinese debt. In London, bond markets swelled. In Hong Kong, new firms emerged to handle the flow. The treaty, designed to limit empire's losses, accidentally built its next empire financial rather than territorial. The camera drifts to Hong Kong's harbour, still half construction site, half frontier. Ships unload not soldiers, but clerks, surveyors, and bankers. The narrator's tone softens into wonder. Asterisk. Here, neutrality itself became profitable. Asterisk. Hong Kong's status as entrepot, nominally outside both Chinese and British tariffs, made it the hinge of regional trade. Cargo came in taxed nowhere, stored, and re-exported at a premium. Within a decade, the island evolved from prize to processor, a marketplace of middlemen. We meet them briefly. Compradors translating ledgers, Scottish agents arbitraging currencies, Chinese brokers fluent in both courtesy and commission. Their handshake was the foundation of the new order commerce written in 2 languages, guaranteed by law that favoured neither morality nor nation, only enforceability. From these deals grew permanence. The narrator names the newborn institutions with measured cadence: the Union Bank of Hong Kong, the Chartered Bank, the Hong Kong and Shanghai Banking Corporation. Each began as a convenience financing cargoes, stabilizing bills of exchange, and became a pillar of empire's cash flow. The camera glides through marble halls, where tellers count coins beneath portraits of monarchs and mandarins alike. Asterisk. Banking turned trust into architecture. Asterisk. A table appears on screen, simple and clear. One column listing treaty clauses, the other, their financial consequences. Fixed tariffs, reduced volatility. Consular courts, lower default risk. Indemnities, capital inflow. Most favoured nation network growth. The narrator sums it up in a single sentence. Asterisk. Law became liquidity. Asterisk. Then comes the twist, spoken softly, almost regretfully. Asterisk. The same paper that protected commerce hollowed the empire that signed it. Asterisk. Each clause that safeguarded foreign trade also carved jurisdiction away from the Qing state. A merchant tried in a consular court no longer feared Chinese law. A bank operating under treaty privilege answered to London, not Beijing. The treaties created safe corridors for capital and corridors through which sovereignty leaked. The camera cuts between contrasts. A British judge, presiding in a consular courtroom while outside, Chinese guards patrol a city they no longer control. A Mandarin accountant tallying customs receipts that pass instantly to foreign treasuries. Asterisk. The empire's architecture still stood, but its foundations now belong to someone else's blueprints. Asterisk. The narrator ties the thought to a broader rhythm. Asterisk. Treaties built trust between rivals and mistrust within states. Asterisk. The Qing bureaucracy found itself obeying contracts it could not rewrite, policing foreigners it could not punish. The fiscal balance restored by opium silver now depended on foreign oversight. Order survived, but ownership shifted. In the final shots, ledgers close, and harbour lights shimmer on calm water. The pen that signed peace has made permanence. The ink has become infrastructure. Asterisk. Paper walls stronger than stone gates. Asterisk. The narrator repeats, voice almost tender. Asterisk. And behind those walls, a new empire of bankers and brokers begins to rise. Asterisk. Law invites capital. Capital seeks neighbourhoods. The next chapter turns inland and upward to the mercantile city as a machine. Fog lifts over the Bund in Shanghai, revealing a promenade of confidence columns, clocks and flagpoles marching along the Huangpu River. Across the water, cargo boats sway with the rhythm of London's market hours. The narrator's voice is soft, almost conversational. Asterisk. The treaty ports did not sleep. They merely synchronized with another time zone. Asterisk. By midday in Shanghai, the exchange in London had opened. By dusk, telegrams and ledgers had already made their round trip across oceans. Schedules of tide and ticker had fused into one heartbeat. We drift down the Bund, past banks and godowns, the camera tracing dock cranes that rise and fall like metronomes. Every bale of silk, every chest of tea, every crate of opium now moves according to invisible arithmetic. The docks are no longer just physical space, they're extensions of the market floor. Ships unload not simply cargo but quotations, translated into local prices before the first crate is unlashed. The narrator's tone carries quiet wonder. Asterisk. This was how empire learned to keep time, by setting its clocks to profit. Asterisk. Compradors, once interpreters and middlemen, have become indispensable routers in this global circuit. They read both markets and moods, fluent in silver rates and social hierarchies. To European firms, they're partners. To Chinese merchants, collaborators. To themselves, survivors. One comprador explains in a surviving letter. Asterisk. A good deal is one that offends no god but satisfies every creditor. Asterisk. Their networks stretch across language and loyalty, holding together a fragile cosmopolitanism built on cash flow. Inside counting houses, familiar names, Jardine, Matheson, Dent, Sassoon, reappear, but their ledgers now mix trades, textiles, timber, machinery, and still, discreetly, opium. The narrator notes without accusation. Asterisk. Diversification was not a moral evolution, it was risk management. Asterisk. The profits from smoke-funded speculation built ships, warehouses, and mills that manufactured everything from cotton cloth to copper wire. The vice that began in the Delta financed the very industries that would later define modern Asia. Guilds, once the guardians of local order, struggle to adapt. Some dissolve, others reinvent themselves as chambers of commerce, their rituals replaced by accountancy. The merchant elite learns to dress in Western suits while sponsoring Confucian festivals. Respectability becomes a kind of currency, and the line between collaboration and adaptation fades. Then comes the quiet reveal, one that arrives not with outrage, but recognition. The narrator guides us through institutions that still stand. Schools with red gates, hospitals overlooking harbours, libraries lined with teak. Plaques on their walls bear donor names that echo from shipping ledgers. Asterisk philanthropy built with smoke. Asterisk fortunes rooted in opium underwrite orphanages, endow scholarships, sponsor medical missions. For some donors, charity is repentance. For others, investment in civic stability. Either way, the money stays. The camera lingers on children reading by lantern light in a classroom built from compromised virtue. The narrator observes gently. Asterisk. Tainted silver still bought clean water. Asterisk. In these cities, contradiction becomes architecture. Granite banks and stone cathedrals rise beside wooden temples and tea-houses. The skyline reads like a moral equation, unresolved. Foreign clubs host lectures on temperance, while dividends from opium still circulate in their accounts. Yet, for those who live here, pragmatism outweighs purity. The city feeds its people, employs its poor, funds its schools. History, as the narrator reminds us, asterisk is never as clean as the ledgers that record it. Asterisk. As the camera moves from Hong Kong's Prior to Shanghai's Bund, dusk turns both harbours to molten gold. Ships' masts line the sky like quills writing new chapters of commerce. Children chase kites along the embankment, their laughter rising above the clamour of traders, shouting prices in 2 languages. The narrator's tone softens, settling into reflection. Asterisk. These were cities built on contradiction, cosmopolitan and complicit, modern and indebted to smoke. Their wealth made them bright, their origins made them fragile. Asterisk. But even as their skylines glitter, the balance tilts inland. The narrator's voice lowers, the light dims. Asterisk. While the ports thrived, the countryside emptied. While merchants gained credit, magistrates lost it. The empire's pulse beat loudest at its edges, while its heart began to falter. Asterisk. The final image holds on the river's shimmer, fading slowly to a map that stretches toward the interior. Asterisk. We turn now from harbours to hinterlands to see how dynastic seams began to split. Asterisk. The camera leaves the glittering coast and turns inland, where the river's slow and the fields thin. The narrator's voice softens, the cadence returning to stillness. Asterisk. Prosperity, like tidewater, stopped where the sea did. Asterisk. Beyond the treaty ports, the empire's pulse faltered. Silver, once the lifeblood of taxation, drained toward the coast and then out to sea. What remained in the interior was coin of lesser worth, paper promises few believed, and a bureaucracy feeding on fragments. Taxes collected in copper lost value before reaching provincial treasuries. Local officials compensated by taking their fees in grain, labour, or bribes. Each transaction eroded a little more authority, but kept the wheels turning another day. Asterisk. Corruption became administration by other means. Asterisk, the narrator observes. The empire still functioned on habit, not hierarchy. The film moves through the provinces. Sichuan's mountain passes, Hunan's flooded fields, Anhui's exhausted plains. Peasants barter rice for salt, magistrates barter favours for loyalty. In one village, a farmer's ledger lists debts not to the state but to his landlord's militia, which now collects both tax and protection. The narrator's voice stays even. Asterisk. When revenue weakens, the sword grows louder than the seal. Asterisk. Secret societies bloom in the vacuum. Heaven and earth, white lotus, small sword. Some preach reform, others revenge. Most simply offer belonging. In tea-houses, coded poems pass for recruitment. In temples, donations double as dues. Each group mimics the bureaucracy it defies leaders called elders. Treasurers, scribes, rules inked in red. Asterisk disobedience. Asterisk, the narrator explains. Asterisk copied its enemy's paperwork. Asterisk. Provincial governors, facing both rebels and foreign envoys, learn to bargain rather than obey. They negotiate peace with bandits, truces with traders, and excuses with Beijing. Reports grow shorter, euphemisms longer. Disturbance contained. One memo reads, though half the district now answers to a warlord. The court issues orders from a distance too great for compliance to reach. The throne still stands, but the steps beneath it crumble. The narrator connects these fissures back to silver, the metal that once bound empire to marketplace. Its flight to coastal treasuries and foreign banks starved the interior of liquidity. Peasants who could not pay in silver paid in resentment. Soldiers went unpaid. Commanders collected taxes directly. Asterisk. Fiscal weakness became military decentralization. Economic leakage became political fragmentation. Asterisk. The voice does not dramatize collapse. It describes sedimentation. Power pools where gravity allows. The Qing state remains nominally intact. Rituals observed, seals impressed, but its authority now rests on borrowed structures. Coastal merchants finance provincial garrisons. Opium taxes feed armies meant to suppress opium's side effects. The circle closes with weary symmetry. In the final images, smoke from village kilns mingles with the haze of distant factories. A procession of officials crosses a wooden bridge, their banners faded but still upright. The narrator's tone drops to a whisper. Asterisk. The dynasty endures but cannot fully rule. The center commands, the edges negotiate. Asterisk. Then the map expands, China's borders glowing faintly against the wider world. Trade routes snake westward across deserts and mountains, converging on Persia, the Ottoman ports, and the passes of Central Asia. Asterisk. Our lens widens. Asterisk, the voice says. Asterisk, opium's arithmetic did not stop at one empire's edge. Its profits and poisons rippled across Persia, the Ottoman world, and the great game beyond. Asterisk. The map unfolds again, this time farther west, the ink bleeding into new colors. Mountains rise where the sea once was, and the line of trade bends through deserts instead of deltas. The narrator's voice steadies, tracing a path from Bengal to Basra, from the Caspian to the Mediterranean. Asterisk. Where maps collide, contraband survives. Asterisk. In Anatolia, in Persia, and across Central Asia, the poppy found new climates and new patrons. What had begun as an imperial tool in the hands of the East India Company now became a regional instrument for everyone who ruled, or hoped to. The narrator's tone remains calm, the vocabulary patient. Asterisk. Opium here was neither purely medicine nor vice. It was revenue, diplomacy, and disguise. Asterisk. We begin in Persia. The camera drifts over the fields of Isfahan and Khorasan, pale petals trembling in dry wind. For centuries, Persian farmers had grown poppies for local use, but by the mid-19th century, foreign demand turned small harvests into political currency. Shahs and governors tried to tax or monopolize production, decreeing that all resin must pass through royal warehouses. Yet every edict met the same quiet resistance: smugglers who moved faster than decrees, tribes whose territories ignored map lines. Asterisk. In a country of mountains, asterisk, the narrator observes, asterisk control was measured not in borders but in bribes. Asterisk. British and Russian interests tangled in these same highlands. Britain wanted to shield India's monopoly. Russia wanted corridors to the Persian Gulf. Each courted local khans and merchants, financing roads or fortresses that doubled as inspection posts and smuggling routes. A caravan protected by one empire's subsidy this year might find its road blocked by that same empire the next. The narrator's tone carries faint irony. Asterisk. Imperial rivalry often protected the trade it claimed to suppress. Asterisk. In Anatolia, Ottoman governors faced their own dilemma. Opium was a traditional export, legitimate, taxed, and indispensable to provincial treasuries. Yet European moral campaigns against the drug forced awkward compromises. The Sublime Porte issued reforms to regulate cultivation, even as army payrolls depended on it. Each province balanced piety and pragmatism. When deficits widened, officials quietly expanded the very cultivation they publicly condemned. The opium field became a mirror of empire, rooted, delicate, and deeply indebted. Across the Caspian, Russian administrators treated the trade as both problem and opportunity. They taxed transit routes through Transcaspia and Turkestan, using customs receipts to finance railways that would soon serve their own conquests. Soldiers stationed along the Oxus confiscated one caravan and escorted the next, depending on orders from St. Petersburg or payments received. The narrator's voice remains unhurried. Asterisk. In the Arithmetic of Empire, vice is never entirely local. Asterisk. The film narrows its focus to a single frontier village, perched where Persia met Afghanistan. Traders arrive on donkeys, their cargo wrapped in rough cloth, labelled as dye or grain. Soldiers from two rival powers camp on opposite ridges, watching each other through spyglasses, but never interfering with the merchants who pass below. The villagers understand the game. Protection fees paid to both sides ensure neutrality. Asterisk. When maps argue, asterisk, the narrator says, asterisk, those who live between them learn diplomacy by instinct. Asterisk. The reveal lands quietly. Imperial rivalry, far from suppressing contraband, sustained it. Each side needed the trade alive to justify its vigilance. Roads funded as anti-smuggling projects soon became the smuggling routes themselves. Customs houses doubled as warehouses. Border posts evolved into market towns. The frontiers, meant to divide, instead pulsed with exchange. The camera pans outward again, the region glowing like a constellation of competing ambitions. British agents in Basra send reports on Persian yields. Russian officers in Bukhara draft memos on caravan volumes. Everywhere, the same pattern repeats. States attempting to tax what they cannot control. Empires policing what they secretly depend on. The narrator's voice returns to the calm logic that underpins the story. Asterisk, poppy and power grew together, each feeding the other, each vulnerable to drought, diplomacy, and demand. Asterisk. As the lights fade on the map, one thought lingers. Asterisk. Rivalry, at the top shaped livelihoods below. Asterisk. The next sequence will follow those who carried the trade on their backs, the caravans, the tribes, the porters who turned empire's arithmetic into survival. Twilight gathers over a stone courtyard somewhere between Herat and Tabriz. The air hums with murmurs in half a dozen tongues. Persian, Pashto, Turkish, Russian, English. The camera drifts among caravans kneeling in dust, bales unlashed, kettles steaming. Above the noise, a low voice of narration smooths the edges. Asterisk. Every empire draws lines, every trader learns how to cross them. Asterisk. Caravanserais were the market's lungs breathing news, risk, and rumour across deserts that ignored all borders. The narrator explains how commerce functioned without formal law. Asterisk. Kinship was credit, trust the only insurance. Asterisk. A cousin in another oasis guaranteed your debt. A proverb carried more weight than a contract. Disputes were settled by reputation, enforced through memory. If a merchant cheated one caravan, he found no welcome in the next. Thus, decentralized honesty persisted where empires failed. We follow one caravan master, an aging Uzbek named Rahim, counting coins by firelight. His profits depend not on price but on precision, knowing which customs post to approach at dawn, which patrol to pay at dusk. Alongside him, young men sing a tune whose lyrics double as navigation instructions, the melody encoding distances between wells. The narrator's tone stays measured, fascinated by the intelligence of necessity. Asterisk. Information travelled not on paper but on wind and song. Asterisk. Every bale of resin, wool, or spice was part of a larger negotiation. Families advanced goods to relatives months before payment. Profits were divided by trust, not statute. Smuggling was less rebellion than routine, a way of reconciling geography with policy. When drought struck or borders shifted, routes bent accordingly. Local governors pretended ignorance so long as caravans paid transit gifts, euphemisms carved into custom. The same state that outlawed the traffic one season might commission it the next, using smugglers as informants or couriers. Asterisk. Illegality was elastic. It stretched with circumstance. Asterisk. The camera lingers on a transaction in the flicker of lamplight, resin changing hands for coin, coin for salt, salt for rumour. The narrator adds a quiet irony. Asterisk. These networks, criminal by decree, often proved more reliable than the bureaucracies that condemned them. Asterisk. When a governor needed news from across the frontier, he hired a caravan man, not a soldier. When famine struck, smugglers became relief workers by accident, ferrying grain through forbidden passes. Then the twist, subtle but human. Along these same roads moved other travellers, missionaries and doctors carrying tracts and medicine. Their journals describe exhaustion and faith, but also uneasy gratitude. Many owed their safe passage to the very brokers they denounced from pulpits. One Scottish missionary writes of a courteous guide, whose hands bore the odour of the poison we seek to banish. The narrator's voice softens into reflection. Asterisk, saints and smugglers shared the same road, for different reasons. Asterisk, both sought access, both required protection, and both learned to temper conviction with pragmatism. We see them side by side, a priest sketching a cross in the dust, a trader mapping a shortcut with the same stick. Between them lies the quiet understanding of travelers who depend on one another more than on distant authorities. The moral geography is no clearer than the political one. The caravan moves, indifferent to sermons or edicts. The narrator zooms out, showing the lattice of roots that tied empires together like threads in an ungovernable fabric. From Anatolia to the Hindu Kush, caravanserais flicker like campfires in the dark. Each marks a moment of truce between legality and livelihood. Asterisk. States criminalized what they could not replace. Asterisk, the voice explains. Asterisk, and relied on what they could not control. Asterisk. As dawn creeps over the courtyard, Rahim's caravan sets out again. The camels' bells faint against the wind. Behind them, the footprints fill with sand. The narrator's tone returns to that slow rhythm of inevitability. Asterisk. The 19th century's circuits will not vanish. They will mutate. Wars will redraw maps. New borders will demand new smugglers. Governments will learn to monopolize what they once merely taxed. Asterisk. The final image holds on the fading caravan trail, smoke, song, and dust merging into the horizon. The map contracts, then unfolds again, new borders, new flags, same terrain. The narrator's voice is low, reflective. Asterisk. Empires fade, but their trades rarely retire. Asterisk. Across Asia, poppy fields remain, but their masters change uniforms. Asterisk. The poppy learned a new language, chemistry. Asterisk. As the 19th century closes, laboratories begin to do what caravans once did. Morphine, first refined in Europe as medicine, promises to tame pain without sin. Then comes heroin, hailed briefly as a non-addictive cure for addiction. The narrator lingers on the irony, calm and unsparing. Asterisk. Every age believes it has improved upon its own vices. Asterisk. The opium den gives way to the pharmacy, the addict to the patient, the smuggler to the chemist. Yet the arithmetic remains, dependency converted into dividends. Colonial administrations, once content to tax the trade, rebrand themselves as reformers. The British Raj establishes narcotics departments. The French in Indochina centralize state monopolies. The Ottomans, then the Turks, introduce permits and laboratory inspections. Regulation is the new revenue. Every seal and stamp preserves the same exchange under gentler names. But as new nation-states emerge from old empires, the pattern hardens. The trade shifts underground, and control becomes prohibition. What could once be taxed must now be hunted. The narrator's voice glides over a montage of transitions. Chemists in white coats where once stood farmers in straw hats, crates labelled medical supply, crossing docks once reserved for contraband. National borders, sharper now, transform smuggling from tolerated craft to organised crime, where kinship once enforced trust, firearms and syndicates now enforce profit. Asterisk. The risk grows, but so does the return. Asterisk. The geography changes faster than the moral. In Persia, government labs compete with clandestine ones. In Burma and Yunnan, warlords finance armies through opium taxes, blending revolution with enterprise. The narrator draws the thread with precision. Asterisk. Every new power inherits both the territory and its temptations. Asterisk. Police, armies, and militias all find use for a crop that grows cash faster than crops of conscience. Then comes the reveal, the beginning of the 20th century's alchemy. Asterisk. The frontier moved from the field to the flask. Asterisk. Refinement replaces harvest. Chemistry replaces caravan. In Geneva and The Hague, diplomats draft international drug conventions, believing paper can tame profit. Meanwhile, scientists perfect techniques for purer morphine, faster heroin, and synthetic substitutes. Each breakthrough births a loophole. As the century tilts toward conflict, new patrons emerge. During the Second World War and the Cold War that follows, intelligence agencies and insurgents alike rediscover opium's utility funding loyalty when budgets falter. rewarding allies when ideology cannot. The narrator's tone stays composed, almost weary. Asterisk. The same poppy that once balanced imperial budgets now bankrolls proxy wars. Asterisk. A map flares once more, showing the mountains where three borders touch Burma, Laos, Thailand. The voice describes the coming convergence with clinical inevitability. Asterisk. Colonial cultivation, chemical refinement, and Cold War logistics will meet here to form a new triangle of profit. Asterisk. The golden triangle's outlines begin to glow faintly on the screen, superimposed over older routes. The music softens to a pulse, echoing a heartbeat. Asterisk. From imperial contraband to modern cartel. Asterisk. The narrator concludes. Asterisk. The tools grow sharper, but the incentives stay the same. Asterisk. The image fades on a field of poppies bending under monsoon rain, timeless, luminous, indifferent. Mist unrolls over the highlands where three borders meet Burma, Laos, Thailand. From above, the landscape looks eternal, ridges veined with red clay, rivers threading through morning fog. Yet beneath that calm, the mid-20th century reshaped the region with restless force. The narrator's voice is steady, almost clinical. Asterisk. Some borders stop flags, not profits. Asterisk. War had pushed millions into motion. The collapse of empires, Japanese occupation, and the convulsions of decolonization left a scatter of militias, refugees, and soldiers without paymasters. When the Chinese nationalists retreated across Yunnan into Burma, they carried weapons, experience, and a survival instinct honed by decades of civil war. Local hill communities, the Wa, the Hmong, the Shan, were caught between armies that claimed protection and states too fragile to provide it. The narrator frames it gently. Asterisk. Where governance failed, cultivation began. Asterisk. The poppy, hardy and discreet, thrived at altitude. It required no irrigation, no paperwork, and offered a yield that could be traded across any frontier. For families displaced by war, it was insurance. For militias, currency. The narrator paints the scene without judgment. Fields carved into misty slopes, latex scraped from pods, resin traded for salt or cartridges. Asterisk. In the highlands, opium was not temptation, but arithmetic light to carry, easy to sell. Asterisk. By the 1950 seconds, production had become both livelihood and strategy. Intelligence services entered the picture, their priorities clear, if not consistent. American and French operatives sought allies against communist insurgencies. Nationalist remnants sought revenue for survival. Airstrips carved into mountain plateaus carried not just supplies and men, but, at times, sacks of resin. Officially, anti-narcotics rhetoric remained firm. Unofficially, the narrator observes, asterisk counterinsurgency and commerce shared logistics. Asterisk. The film presents this continuity as policy's shadow. Asterisk pragmatism survived every ideology. Asterisk. Where colonial administrators once taxed opium to fund rule, Cold War agencies tolerated its traffic to fund resistance. Documentation remains partial, fragmentary, but patterns repeat. The narrator recites them with forensic calm. Selective enforcement, plausible deniability, intelligence briefings filed beside crop surveys. The same air routes that delivered humanitarian aid sometimes returned with cargo that smelled faintly sweet. On the ground, ethnic armies and local warlords became brokers between politics and production. In Burma's Shan states, figures like Kun Sa and Lo Xing Han would later embody this fusion half merchant, half militia. In Laos, the Hmong, supported by foreign air power, found themselves both defenders of the state and cultivators of the plant that financed defense. The narrator pauses, giving space for complexity. Asterisk. Morality moved slower than necessity. Asterisk. Each frontier adapted to its own equations. In Thailand, royal anti-narcotics programs alternated with covert alliances. In Burma, the army both fought and taxed insurgents. In Laos, factions funded themselves through the very trade they condemned. The pattern remained hauntingly familiar. Asterisk. The state denounced what it could not afford to lose. Asterisk. The reveal arrives without drama, spoken like an account closing. Asterisk. Anti-communist campaigns often purchased loyalty with tolerance. Asterisk. Where control was impossible, accommodation became strategy. Airlifts, payrolls, and supply chains depended on revenue streams few dared audit. The narrator's tone remains neutral, the imagery meticulous. A convoy winding through fog, a checkpoint waved through by soldiers who knew better than to inspect. The film widens its focus to the global frame. Demand had not vanished. It had migrated from colonial consumers to modern cities, from pipe to syringe. As the Cold War divided ideology, commerce ignored it. Resin moved through the same old routes, finding new chemists and new patrons. The triangle's geography made it nearly self-sufficient. Mountain fields, jungle labs, river ports. The borders that separated armies connected traders. The narrator sums it up in a quiet cadence that feels both epitaph and preface. Asterisk. The Golden Triangle was less a place than a habit of survival, the meeting point of disorder and opportunity. Asterisk. Guns, ideology, and narcotics overlapped not by conspiracy, but by convergence. In a world where every frontier was armed, and every alliance temporary, opium once again became the most reliable negotiator. As night folds back over the mountains, a single light burns at an airstrip below, a generator humming, a plane idling, a deal unspoken. The voice lowers, calm as ever. Asterisk. Production finds protection. Protection finds profit. What it still needs are markets and machines. Asterisk. The screen fades toward the glint of laboratory glass and city lights beyond the hills. Asterisk. Production needs markets. Asterisk. The narrator says. Asterisk. And chemistry amplifies value. Enter the heroin labs, the logistics, and the laundering. Asterisk. A door opens on the modern era with a hiss, not a cheer, the hiss of vapor, of boiling solvent. The camera glides past glass flasks and steel drums, the chemistry of profit humming in secret. The narrator's voice is low, patient, forensic. Asterisk. When law raised the walls, chemistry built a ladder. Asterisk. The poppy's resin, once soft and brown, scraped from pods in highland mist, enters a new world of equations. In jungle huts and backroom labs, the sticky opium is boiled, filtered, and treated with lime to yield morphine base, lighter, purer, more mobile. Then come the reagents acetic anhydride, ammonia, heat. The result is white crystals of extraordinary potency. Heroin, a substance that shrinks geography. 100 pounds of opium become 10 of morphine, 1 of heroin. The narrator's tone remains analytical. Asterisk. Each refinement multiplies value, compressing fortune into secrecy. Asterisk. Weight-to-value ratios transform the entire logistics chain. What once required mule trains and barges now fits inside a duffel bag. The economics invert the map, risk concentrates upward, reward accelerates. A courier who once carried bulk resin now needs only a fraction of the space and earns a fortune for it. The mountains are still the same, but time and distance have been recalculated. The narrator's lens widens to follow this new circuitry. Mountain fields feeding hillside refineries, small aircraft ferrying sealed packages to jungle airstrips. Riverboats disguised as traders gliding toward delta warehouses. From there, urban networks take over. Couriers hand off to middlemen to exporters. The chain moves like breath inhalation and exhalation between continents. Asterisk. Every step divides risk just enough to keep the system alive. Asterisk. Downstream, the money re-enters daylight. Banks, front businesses, and trade accounts launder the proceeds. A used car dealership, a chain of restaurants, a shipping agency, they all hum with cash, slightly too clean. Profits loop into property. Apartment blocks in Rangoon, storefronts in Bangkok, seaside villas under foreign flags. The narrator explains with calm detachment. Asterisk. Illegality requires infrastructure just as legitimacy does. The difference lies in paperwork. Asterisk. Prohibition, meant to choke the trade, becomes its oxygen. Each enforcement wave trims the weakest players and fattens the survivors. Seizures tighten supply, prices climb, margins widen. The narrator gives it the weight of economic law. Asterisk. In every market, scarcity rewards scale and ruthlessness. Asterisk. The cartels that emerge are less bands of outlaws than business syndicates, vertically integrated, capitalized, diversified. Their ledgers resemble the merchant firms of a century before. Their risk models echo the logic of empire. The 19th century's ghost walks again, this time in mirrored sunglasses. The narrator pauses on a striking parallel. Asterisk. Finance rides alongside force, as it always has. Asterisk. Gunmen guard the caravans, accountants guard the accounts. Both are indispensable. The chemistry of refinement mirrors the mathematics of laundering, each designed to purify without trace. And above both hovers a paradox older than the trade itself. Laws meant to suppress vice end up institutionalizing it, selecting for those most able to endure pressure. The film shows the full cycle: resin to crystal, crystal to currency, currency to glass towers, overlooking the very docks where enforcement patrols. The difference between opium trader and banker is one of vocabulary. One moves product, the other liquidity. The narrator's tone remains clinical, but not cold. Asterisk. The machinery that once bound tea, silver, and opium now binds credit, cash, and narcotics. The actors change, but the script survives. Asterisk. A quiet montage closes the section. Chemists rinsing jars in river water, a courier slipping into a crowd, an accountant reviewing columns of digits that shimmer like ghost silver. Asterisk. When law raised the walls, chemistry built a ladder. Asterisk. The voice repeats, fading into silence. Asterisk. And at the top, the view looks hauntingly familiar. Asterisk. Asterisk. We tie the scene back to the old script. States, markets, and moral theatre performing a familiar play with updated props. Asterisk. The camera rises through fog, retracing a journey already travelled. Bengal's green plains, Canton's estuary, Calcutta's auction halls, the golden haze over the Burmese hills. The narrator's voice, calm and assured, threads it together. Asterisk. Across 2 centuries, the cargo has changed shape, but not direction. Resin became crystal. Merchants became syndicates. The sea routes became spreadsheets. The past is not past, it's laundered. Asterisk. We see the triangle drawn and redrawn, always 3 points, endlessly rearranged. First it was tea, silver, and opium. Now it is demand, supply, and permissive corridors. At each vertex, someone needs, someone provides, someone looks away. The geometry survives empire, ideology, and law because it serves them all in turn. Asterisk. Markets remember what dynasties forget, how appetite builds order faster than edict. Asterisk. The narrator moves through centuries with the same unhurried cadence. Bengal's coerced farmers sowing poppy under tax collectors' gaze. Canton merchants counting coins that would fund palaces and prisons alike. Victorian financiers translating addiction into dividends. Cold War airstrips turning resin into leverage. Each age convinces itself that this time it is different, that morality has caught up with profit. Yet the pattern holds. Asterisk. Revenue needs meet moral claims, and each excuses the other. Asterisk. Images overlap. An East India Company seal dissolves into a modern corporate logo. A chest of Patna opium fades into a shipping container stamped with a global brand. The narrator explains without accusation. Asterisk. Institutions born in grey zones outlive their origins. The skill of managing contradiction becomes a model for stability. Asterisk. A firm that once traded contraband becomes a bank. A smuggler's route becomes a highway. A fiscal addiction becomes a nation's budget. Legality, the narrator notes, is not purity, it is endurance. The montage slows on faces, clerks in Calcutta, compradors in Canton, chemists in Laos, traders in glass towers, all turning numbers into survival. Each believes they are far removed from the last, but their ledgers rhyme. Asterisk. Every era inherits both the wealth and the amnesia of the one before it. Asterisk. What was once empire's necessity becomes modernity's inertia, the pursuit of liquidity under the banner of progress. Then the frame widens again. The camera looks down on a world webbed by shipping lanes, flight paths, and fiber optics, each pulse a descendant of that first imbalance. Tea for silver, silver for opium, opium for solvency. The same principles persist. Exploit disparity, minimize friction, conceal risk. The narrator's tone softens, almost elegiac. Asterisk. History does not repeat, it compounds. Asterisk. We end where it began, with an invisible exchange, a market running on things half seen. Asterisk. The past is not past, it's laundered. Asterisk. The voice repeats, quieter now. The silver once melted in Canton furnaces gleams today in skyscraper glass. The ships still sail, only the cargo's name has changed. The music thins to a single note as the narrator prepares the next question. Asterisk. We have followed the trade across empires and equations. Now we must ask, what did dynasties forget that markets remembered? Asterisk. The screen fades in on still water, the Pearl River, the Thames, perhaps the Irrawaddy. No labels, no dates, only light moving across the surface, as if time itself were exhaling. The narrator speaks in the same measured tone that has carried us through the centuries. Asterisk. Every empire keeps two ledgers, one for the public, one for the truth. Asterisk. The journey we've traced, the voice reminds us, was never only about opium. It was about dependency, fiscal, moral, institutional. Dynasties and democracies alike fall not merely from defeat, but from the quiet accumulation of habits they cannot break. The Qing court, the British Parliament, the modern state, all share this flaw. The inability to confront what sustains them when that sustenance feels shameful. Asterisk. Revenue is the most persuasive silence in politics. Asterisk. The narrator begins to translate history into principles, not maxims. Asterisk. First, economics weaponizes invisibly. Prices move before armies. Asterisk. Long before gunboats appeared at Canton, silver's shortage had already breached China's sovereignty. The balance sheets of traders achieved what fleets later confirmed. Today's sanctions and financial blockades follow the same logic. War by accounting. Markets can impose sieges without firing a shot. A nation's vulnerabilities often begin as discrepancies in its spreadsheets. Asterisk. Second, legality is contingent. Markets exploit the boundaries that officials draw for virtue. Asterisk. When the Qing banned opium, smugglers profited. When Britain outlawed the slave trade, credit replaced chains. Laws define opportunity as much as they restrict it. Prohibition breeds ingenuity. Regulation breeds specialization. The market does not recognize sin, only asymmetry. Every moral barrier becomes a pricing mechanism. The narrator's tone remains calm, letting discomfort bloom in the listener's own mind. Asterisk. Third, institutions have memories. Banks, laws, and cities carry their origins into their futures. Asterisk. Hong Kong's skyline still echoes the ledgers of the East India Company. The legal codes that protect global finance descend from clauses written to defend free trade in opium. Even today's compliance departments and risk algorithms, those antiseptic guardians of transparency, owe their lineage to men who learned to manage vice politely. Asterisk. Architecture forgets more slowly than people do. Asterisk. The camera lingers on these cities, Hong Kong, London, Singapore, Shanghai, shimmering like coins under glass. The narrator connects them without accusation. Asterisk. These are not monuments to corruption, but to continuity. Asterisk. They remind us that economies, once constructed, refuse to vanish simply because their foundations embarrass us. You cannot erase an origin story that still earns interest. A pause, then a gentle shift to the present. Asterisk. Modern debates over sanctions, shadow banking, cryptocurrency, or grey finance are not new moral dramas, they are sequels. Asterisk. The tools change, the theatre remains. Behind every clean policy lies a residue of compromise, secret accounts that fund public virtue, double-entry ethics balanced delicately between enforcement and evasion. The narrator never moralizes, only observes. Asterisk. We still build systems that depend on what we officially forbid. Asterisk. Then the reveal, delivered softly, like the conclusion of an equation. Asterisk. Moral clarity usually arrives only after the credit cycle closes. Asterisk. When trade collapses, when markets correct, when institutions fail, Then the rhetoric of purity returns. In the swell of prosperity, rationalizations sound like governance. It is only when the tide retreats that we name our dependencies sins. The film overlays images. Qing officials debating silver reserves, Victorian bankers toasting dividends, modern policymakers studying debt charts. Their gestures rhyme. The narrator's voice threads them together. Asterisk. Governance and justification are twins. Only hindsight distinguishes them. Asterisk. The tone shifts toward reflection. The lesson is not confession but comprehension. Asterisk. The opium economy was an early rehearsal for globalization, a system that linked moral discomfort to monetary need. Asterisk. Its aftershocks continue wherever profit outruns principle, and then pretends surprise. The narrator steps back one last time, summarizing without sermon. Asterisk. Economics remains the most persistent language of power. It rewrites ethics into efficiency, and efficiency back into ethics, until the cycle feels inevitable. Asterisk. The audience is invited to notice, not judge, to see the continuity between the ledgers of empire and the spreadsheets of today. The camera holds on the water again, perfectly still. Asterisk. Every empire keeps two ledgers. Asterisk. The narrator repeats. Asterisk. One for the public, one for the truth. The question is never which exists, but which we choose to read. Asterisk. A faint swell of sound, perhaps wind, perhaps surf. Asterisk. From theory to touch. Asterisk. The voice continues, softening to a whisper. Asterisk. One last story remains to bring the arc home, from ledger to life. Asterisk. Dawn spills over the river like a ledger reopened. The narrator's voice, softer now, moves from principle to person. Asterisk. History is not built by villains or heroes. Asterisk, it says. Asterisk, but by people who looked at tomorrow and tried to make it slightly less cruel than today. Asterisk. Three such threads unfold, small lives woven into the empire's vast arithmetic. The first begins in Bengal, where a farmer's descendant still tends the same soil his ancestor once rented from the company. The land is smaller now, divided by inheritance, drought, and the long patience of poverty. In his home, an old chest holds brittle papers, the ghost of a contract signed generations ago, a thumbprint beside a seal. The narrator tells us that the original cultivator never read the language he marked. He only knew that refusing would bring soldiers, and accepting might bring seed. His descendant, leafing through the pages, pauses on that fading signature. Asterisk. Debt, it seems, also reproduces itself. Asterisk. Yet in this house, no bitterness lingers, only the quiet endurance of people who learned that history is an inheritance you neither choose nor escape. The second thread unspools in Canton, in a cramped apartment stacked with boxes of ledgers and letters. A scholar granddaughter of a comprador who once balanced ledgers for British merchants catalogues her family archive. Her great-grandfather's handwriting is meticulous, full of both precision and apology. The letters speak of bridges built, favours returned, small triumphs carved from contradiction. In one note he writes, Asterisk. To belong to two worlds is to disappoint both, but feed both. Asterisk. His descendants, prosperous through his compromises, read the words as confession and warning. The narrator's voice is tender. Asterisk. He bought his family's future at the price of simplicity. Asterisk. His legacy survives not in shame but in fluency, the ability to translate between languages, laws, and loyalties. The third story surfaces from another archive, a clerk's diary found in the basement of a London bank. Its pages smell faintly of ink and mildew. Each entry records transactions from the 1,840 seconds, loans to merchants, transfers from India, credits cleared against opium auctions. The handwriting is brisk until one date, when it falters. The entry reads, Asterisk. I wonder whether the sums I balance also balance me. Asterisk. No one knows who he was. He left no heirs, only the neat arithmetic of conscience. The narrator pauses, letting the line linger like an exhale. Asterisk. Even within the machine, someone heard its hum and doubted its harmony. Asterisk. The three threads meet by chance in the film's quiet twist. Among the comprador's papers lies a yellowed receipt, a donation to a hospital in Hong Kong 1894 funded by opium revenue. Records show that the Bengal cultivator's descendant, working there a century later as a labourer, once carried a feverish child into its ward. The child survived, grew up to study medicine, and became an advocate for addiction treatment in modern China. The narrator does not dramatize the coincidence. It simply lays it down like a stone skipping once across water. Asterisk, the hand that harmed, also helped. What should we do with that? Asterisk. The film lingers on the question. History, the narrator suggests, offers no absolution, only recognition. The moral ledger never balances. Its credits and debits cross centuries, changing names but not nature. Every kindness may carry a shadow, every cruelty, a seed of repair. What redeems these lives is not purity but persistence, the quiet determination to keep the next page cleaner than the last. We see the Bengal farmer at sunset, the Canton archivist sealing a box, the ghost of the clerk's diary resting in a glass case. 3 gestures, 3 silences. The narrator's voice gentles to a whisper. Asterisk. None of them meant to unmake a dynasty. They meant to survive their day. But survival, multiplied by millions, is how dynasties end. Asterisk. The camera turns outward once more, toward the harbour under a moonlit sky, the same harbour we began with. But now the audience can read the currents. The lights on the water flicker like footnotes still being written. Asterisk. The night returns. Asterisk, the narrator says. Asterisk. But this time, we know what it hides and what it reveals. Asterisk. Lanterns drift once more across black water. Their reflections ripple, stretching and breaking like sentences unfinished. The narrator's voice returns, steady and almost tender. Asterisk. We began here, with light floating on trade's dark tide. We end here, too, because the current never stops. The next forbidden ledger is already open. Asterisk. Each lantern, the voice suggests, could be a page, a record of transaction, a note of hope, a small admission that every civilization depends on something it prefers not to name. Asterisk. Contraband is not only a substance. Asterisk, the narrator murmurs. Asterisk. It is a structure of need, of narrative, of numbers. Asterisk. The poppy was one form, silver another. Today's equivalents wear different names but follow the same geometry. A demand denied in daylight, a supply justified by necessity, and an authority that pretends surprise. The camera glides over the harbour, showing cranes, cargo ships, and glass towers shimmering like constellations. The scene feels timeless, 19th century silhouettes merging with modern skylines. The narrator continues, calm and clear. Asterisk. Look at the habits that seem harmless, the screens that calm us, the loans that bind us, the comforts that travel farther than their costs. Every era has its polite addictions, its acceptable dependencies. Every era believes its ledgers are honest until the audit comes. Asterisk. A slow montage of archival images flickers across the dark. Poppy fields, ledgers, bank halls, cityscapes at night. Over them, the voice folds thought into closure. Asterisk. History's mercy is that it leaves us choices. Not whether to profit or to lose, but whether to look closely enough to understand the price. Asterisk. The narrator never indicts. It simply balances the tone between awe and accountability. Asterisk. We are not separate from the story we have traced. We inherit its tools, its math, its appetite, its imagination. The question is what we build with them next. Asterisk. A final pause. The water glows with lantern light, the sound of waves barely audible beneath the score. Asterisk. Every empire writes 2 ledgers, public and private, moral and material. Every citizen lives between them. We can close one, but the other keeps growing, line by line, as long as desire needs arithmetic. Asterisk. The music rises strings, slow, unresolved. The narrator's voice softens to a whisper, its rhythm matching the sway of the lanterns. Asterisk. The next forbidden ledger is already open. The ink is invisible for now, but the entries are being written in commodities, in code, in habits too familiar to notice. What matters is not to close the book, but to read it while the light still holds. Asterisk. The screen fades to black. Archival images appear behind the credits. Bengal fields, Canton docks, Hong Kong skylines, mountain caravans. The score remains steady, neither mournful nor triumphant, a pulse that feels like thought itself. The final frame returns to the still harbour, lanterns drifting out of sight.